The morning sun cast long shadows across the academy's polished stone courtyard, but Leon felt none of its warmth. He stood at the edge of the practice formation, his academy uniform, standard gray with the single black stripe denoting F rank, hanging slightly loose on his slender frame. Around him, 30 other students moved with practiced precision, their expressions focused as they prepared for the day's drill. Remember the parameters. Instructor Kale's voice boomed across the courtyard, his own S-class status evident in the crispness of his movements. Rule 47b, a smile must be returned in 3 seconds or face paralysis. Today we practice the timing. Partner up. Leon watched as students paired off with familiar ease. He remained standing alone until a sharp nudge from behind nearly sent him stumbling. Looking for a partner, error, sneered Jax, a B-rank student whose broad shoulders seemed designed to block sunlight. His partner, a girl named Alara with the same B-rank insignia, smirked beside him. Oh wait, you can't actually practice this. You just freeze up like last time. Laughter rippled through the nearby students. Leon kept his eyes fixed on the ground, the familiar heat of shame crawling up his neck. He'd heard the nickname Error for months now, ever since his first evaluation had revealed his complete inability to sense or obey cosmic rules through conventional means. While other students could feel the pressure of a rule's activation like atmospheric changes, Leon experienced nothing but silence. Leon, with me, Instructor Kale said, his tone not unkind but carrying the weariness of repeated disappointment. We'll run through the motions. They took positions facing each other. Kale's face was all sharp angles and discipline, his eyes the color of storm clouds. At his signal, he offered a practiced, neutral smile, the kind that triggered Rule 47b without emotional investment. Leon knew the drill. He had to return the smile within 3 seconds. He forced his lips upward, but the expression felt wrong, stiff and unnatural. His mind raced through the steps he'd memorized, recognize the smile, identify it as a trigger, initiate facial response. But there was no instinctual pull, no subtle vibration in the air that other students described feeling when rules activated. 2 seconds passed. 3. Leon's smile remained that awkward, forced grimace. A cold sensation began at his fingertips, the telltale sign of Rule 47b's paralysis effect beginning its work. He tried to move his hand, but his fingers remained frozen in place. And that's why he's F rank, Jax muttered just loud enough to carry. More laughter followed. Leon felt the cold spread to his wrists before Instructor Kale waved a hand, deactivating the drill. The paralysis receded, leaving behind only the lingering chill of humiliation. You're thinking about it too much, Kale said, though they both knew that wasn't the real problem. The rules aren't mathematics to be calculated. They're reality to be felt. Leon nodded, not trusting his voice. He'd heard variations of this lecture dozens of times. The problem was simple, he couldn't feel the rules. Not like others could. While his classmates described sensations, pressure changes, temperature shifts, auditory cues, Leon experienced only the ordinary world. The cosmic rules that govern survival might as well have been written in invisible ink. Except for the log. He blinked, and for just a moment, lines of faint green text flickered at the edge of his vision. They appeared like afterimages, translucent and shimmering. System check, user Leon. Rank, F, compliance rate, 0.03%. The text vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving Leon wondering, as he often did, if he was simply going mad. These glimpses had started 6 months ago, brief flashes of what looked like system code superimposed over reality. At first, he dismissed them as stress-induced hallucinations. But they persisted, growing slightly clearer with time, though never coherent enough to read properly. The academy physicians had found nothing wrong with him, which only deepened his isolation. Either he was broken in a way they couldn't detect, or he was inventing symptoms to explain his failures. Break for 15 minutes. Kale announced. Then we'll run the drill in rotating trios. Students scattered, some heading for the shade of the academy's arched colonnades, others clustering in groups to discuss technique. Leon moved toward a solitary bench near the western wall, where he could be alone with his thoughts. As he walked, he noticed the shadows stretching differently today. They seemed sharper somehow, as if the sunlight had grown more precise in its angles. The academy's stonework, usually smooth and uniform, showed minute cracks he'd never noticed before, hairline fractures that caught the light in strange ways. He sat on the bench, the cool stone seeping through his uniform pants. From his pocket, he withdrew a small, leather-bound notebook. Its pages were filled with his attempts to document the flickering text, fragmented phrases, half-remembered symbols, timestamps of when the visions occurred. He called it his debug log, though he had no idea what he was debugging. The name had come to him in a dream, and it stuck. Today's entry would be brief: drill failure. More laughter. Green text during paralysis, system check mention. Shadows look wrong. He was closing the notebook when a commotion erupted near the academy's main gates. An S-class hero had arrived. Leon recognized her immediately, Serafina, known for her work containing rule breaches in the northern districts. She moved with the effortless grace of someone who understood reality's rhythms, her silver and blue armor catching the sunlight in dazzling patterns. Students gathered around, their earlier mockery forgotten in the presence of genuine power. Instructor Kale, Serafina said, her voice carrying clearly across the courtyard. We have a situation developing in the glitch zone. The council requests academy support for monitoring duty. Kale nodded briskly. Of course. Which rule is destabilizing? Rule 89, the whispered lie. It's showing premature activation patterns. We've contained the zone, but we need observers stationed at key points. A murmur ran through the students. The whispered lie was a particularly insidious rule. It activated when someone spoke an untruth in a whisper, gradually petrifying the liar from the inside out. Premature activation meant the rule was triggering without the proper conditions, a dangerous sign of system instability. I'll select a team, Kale said, already scanning the students. Leon knew he wouldn't be chosen. Monitoring duty required at least C-rank sensitivity to detect rule fluctuations. He watched as Kale pointed to Jax, Elara, and 3 other high-ranking students. They straightened with pride, falling into formation behind Serafina. That's when the world glitched. It started with the shadows. They didn't just lengthen, they fractured, splitting into jagged pieces that didn't match the objects casting them. The sunlight itself seemed to stutter, flickering between normal brightness and something harsher, more artificial. Serafina suddenly stiffened. Her hand went to her throat. No, it's here. The rule. Her whisper was barely audible, but it carried on the suddenly still air. And as she spoke, Leon saw it. Not a monster. Not some cosmic horror emerging from between dimensions. Code. Green lines of text cascaded across his vision, sharp and clear for the first time. They scrolled too fast to read completely, but fragments burned themselves into his awareness. Rule 89, whispered_lie. Status, active. Target, Serafina. Condition_check, truth_value equals false. Error, truth value mismatch at line 47. Memory_leak detected in conditional_buffer. Around him, panic erupted. Students backed away as Serafina's skin began to take on a gray, stony texture starting at her lips and spreading downward. Her eyes widened in horror, her fingers clutching at her own throat as if she could physically stop the petrification. The rule's active. Kale shouted. Everyone back. Maintain silence. But Leon wasn't looking at Serafina anymore. He was reading the code. The error message repeated, flashing insistently, error, truth value mismatch at line 47. Below it, he could see, or rather, sense, the structure of the rule's programming. It was like looking at the blueprint of a building through foggy glass, but the flaw was obvious once he knew where to look. The rule checked if a statement was false. But there was a memory leak in the conditional buffer, it wasn't properly clearing previous truth values. The system was getting confused about what constituted false, because old data was corrupting new checks. Serafina was now half stone, the grayness reaching her shoulders. Her breathing came in ragged, shallow gasps. In moments, she would be completely petrified, another S-class hero lost to a rule breach. Leon's mind worked furiously, parsing the code fragments. The memory leak created a vulnerability. If he could introduce contradictory data at precisely the right moment, he might overload the buffer, cause a crash. He didn't think. He acted. Stepping forward despite Kale's shouted warning, Leon moved toward Serafina. The other students stared at him as if he'd lost his mind. Jax's mouth hung open in disbelief. Leon leaned close to the petrifying hero. The code in his vision pulsed, showing the memory buffer's cyclical refresh pattern. He had to time this exactly. He whispered 4 words, injecting them into the system at the moment the buffer was most vulnerable. This is not a lie. The effect was instantaneous. The green code in Leon's vision flashed red. Paradox_injection detected. Conditional_buffer overflow. Rule 89, crash. Serafina gasped as the petrification reversed. The gray stone texture receded from her skin like tide pulling back from shore, leaving behind healthy flesh. She stumbled backward, caught by Kale, her eyes wide with shock and confusion. Around them, the fractured shadows snapped back to normal. The stuttering sunlight stabilized. The whispered lie rule had been disrupted, its effects nullified. Silence descended on the courtyard, deeper than before. Every eye was fixed on Leon. He felt a sharp pain behind his temples, the mental strain of parsing and manipulating code he barely understood. His knees trembled, but he remained standing. Then his debug log updated. New text appeared, not in green but in urgent, pulsing crimson, anomaly detected, user, Leon, flagged for system review. Enforcer dispatch initiated. Leon looked up, following the instinctive pull of the warning. At the Academy's main gates, shadows were coalescing. Not ordinary shadows, these were deeper, darker, as if carved from the absence of light itself. They took shape, resolving into tall, silent figures wearing featureless masks that reflected no light. Their uniforms were black and seamless, devoid of insignia or rank markers. Enforcers. 6 of them stood just beyond the gates, unmoving but unmistakably focused on the courtyard. On him. One of them raised a hand, and the Academy's protective wards, usually invisible, flared to life in a shimmering blue dome. The Enforcer's touch didn't breach them, but the ward strained visibly, rippling with stress patterns Leon could suddenly see as more code, Academy_wards, integrity 94%. 93%. 92%. Instructor Kale stepped between Leon and the gates, his expression unreadable. "Stay behind me," he murmured, though his eyes kept flicking to the enforcers. Serafina had recovered enough to stand on her own. She looked from Leon to the enforcers and back, understanding dawning in her eyes. "What did you do?" she whispered, not accusingly but with genuine bewilderment. Leon had no answer. He could only watch as more enforcers materialized in the streets beyond the Academy, a dozen now, maybe more, all facing inward, all silent, all waiting. The crimson text in his vision pulsed once more, review imminent. Prepare for containment. And in that moment, Leon understood 2 things with perfect clarity. First, he wasn't broken. He was something else entirely, an anomaly in a system that demanded conformity. Second, the system had just noticed him. The Academy's polished marble floors, usually echoing with the confident strides of B-rank and higher students, now trembled under a different rhythm. Leon pressed himself against the cold stone of a corridor alcove, his breath shallow. From around the corner, the sound came, not footsteps, but a synchronized, mechanical thud-thud-thud that seemed to absorb all other noise. He risked a glance. 3 figures marched down the center of the hallway. They wore seamless gray uniforms and featureless white masks that reflected no light. Enforcers. They moved with an unnatural precision, their limbs swinging in perfect unison. As Leon watched, one of them stepped directly on a crack between tiles. The rule, "Do not step on cracks," was one of the Academy's most basic drills. Violation meant temporary paralysis for students. The enforcer didn't even break stride. No ripple of energy, no consequence. They moved through the world's rules like they were walking through fog. Leon's vision flickered. Text scrolled across his peripheral vision in jagged green characters, his debug log activating without conscious command. Entity, system_enforcer, priority, high. Status, active patrol. Permissions, rule_exemption_class_A. Threat_level, critical. His heart hammered against his ribs. They were here for him. The anomaly flagged when he'd crashed Rule 89. The memory of Serafina's petrifying form flashed through his mind, followed by the satisfaction of watching the rule dissolve into harmless static. That satisfaction had curdled into cold fear. The enforcers turned their heads in unison, those blank masks scanning the corridor. Leon ducked back into the alcove, pressing his back against the stone. He could hear Instructor Kale's voice from earlier that morning, booming through the drill hall, "Remember your ranks. F ranks to the observation deck." The laughter that had followed still burned in his ears. Now that laughter felt like a distant luxury. Being mocked was preferable to being hunted by things that ignored fundamental laws of reality. He had to move. The library. It was the closest place with enough cover, and more importantly, it was dense with rules. The Academy Library wasn't just a repository of knowledge, it was a labyrinth of cosmic regulations meant to preserve order among ancient texts. Silence must be maintained, no open flames within 20 paces of scrolls, books must not be shelved upside down. Dozens of minor rules that students memorized for survival drills. Leon slipped from the alcove and moved down a side corridor, keeping his footsteps light. His debug log continued to scroll data, analyzing his surroundings. Environment, Academy_halls. Active_rules, 47B, smile_return, 12C, crack_avoidance, 88F, no_running_in_halls. Warning, enforcer_signature_detected_300_meters. 300 meters. Too close. He broke into a run, violating Rule 88F, immediately, pressure built around his ankles, the rule attempting to slow him. But his log showed something interesting, the rule's enforcement had a delay of 0.3 seconds. He timed his steps, pushing off just as the pressure released, using the rhythm to gain speed. A crude hack, but it worked. The library doors loomed ahead, massive oak reinforced with silver script that glowed with contained energy. Leon slammed his palm against the reader. His student ID was still F-rank clearance, but the system recognized him. The doors hissed open just wide enough for him to slip through, then sealed behind him with a definitive thud. Silence. The library stretched upward 3 stories, with balconies circling a central atrium. Shelves rose like cliffs, packed with volumes bound in leather, metal, and materials Leon couldn't identify. The air smelled of old paper, ozone from active preservation fields, and something else, the faint electric tang of cosmic rules at work. Green script floated near certain sections, rule, no_whispering_near_restricted_section, rule, return_books_within_7_days. Leon moved between shelves, his breathing gradually slowing. He found a nook behind a cart of unshelved books and crouched. His log updated. Environment, Academy_library. Active_rules, 34 detected. Notable, Rule_19G, Book_orientation, Rule_77K, Silence_maintenance, Rule_42A, No_food_drink. Enforcer_signature, Approaching_entrance. They were at the doors. He could hear the thud-thud-thud through the oak. Think. He had to think. The enforcers had rule_exemption_class_A, they could ignore most academy regulations. But maybe not all of them. Maybe there was something here, some rule with a vulnerability he could exploit. His eyes scanned the shelves. Rule 19G, books must not be shelved upside down. He'd failed that drill twice last semester, earning extra cleaning duty. The punishment for violation was temporary blindness, the offending text would project distorted letters into the violator's vision for 30 seconds. But what if the rule itself had a flaw? Leon reached for his debug log, focusing his mind. The green text in his vision sharpened, then began to parse the local rule matrix. It was like watching code compile in real time, lines of shimmering text that represented the library's regulatory framework. He found Rule 19G, its structure appearing as nested conditional statements. Rule 19G. Condition, if book_orientation equals inverted. Action, trigger_visual_distortion, target, violator. Parameters, duration equals 30s, intensity equals medium. Exceptions, system_maintenance, authorized_reorganization. There. A memory leak in the exception handling. The rule checked for authorized_reorganization status, but the verification subroutine had a buffer overflow, it could be tricked into accepting any input if presented in a specific format. Leon's mind raced. The rule triggered visual distortion on the violator. But what if he could redirect it? Or amplify it? The library doors groaned. Not the smooth hydraulic hiss of normal operation, but a sound of strain, as if immense pressure were being applied. Silver script on the doors flared bright, then began to crackle with energy. The enforcers weren't waiting for clearance. Leon stood, his hands trembling slightly. He reached for a nearby shelf, his fingers brushing leather spines until he found what he needed, a thick volume bound in dark blue. Chronicles of the Silent Era. He pulled it free, flipping it upside down. Immediately, green warning text flashed in his vision. Warning, Rule_19G_violation_ detected. Visual_distortion_activation_N, 5, 4. No. Not yet. He had to time this perfectly. The doors shuddered, one of them bending inward. Through the gap, he could see a featureless white mask staring directly at him. Leon focused on the book's title. Chronicles of the Silent Era. Backward. Eri Tniles 8FO Selenor C. The pronunciation didn't matter, the rule checked for phonetic reversal in its exception verification. He whispered the reversed title, pouring his concentration into the act. His head throbbed. A sharp, insistent pain blossomed behind his eyes, the cost of forcing his log to interface so precisely with active rule code. He could feel the system pushing back, his mind straining to maintain the connection. Exception_verification, input_received. Buffer_overflow_detected. Rule_19G, redirecting_target. The library doors burst inward. 3 enforcers stepped through, their movements synchronized. They didn't scan the room, they turned as one toward Leon's position, as if he were broadcasting his location. Leon held the inverted book aloft and spoke the reversed title again, louder this time. Eri Tniles 8FO Selenor C. The air shimmered around the book. Instead of distorted text flooding Leon's vision, the rule glitched. The exception handling crashed, and the visual distortion parameters went wild, amplified, unfocused, spraying outward in a cone from the book. Tendrils of shimmering, twisted letters erupted from the volume. They weren't words anymore, but jagged shapes that hurt to look at, fragments of alphabets from dead languages, mathematical symbols rendered nonsensical, binary code that flickered between 1 and 0 too fast to follow. The distortion washed over the enforcers. For the first time, they reacted. Their synchronized march broke. One raised a hand to its mask as if shielding non-existent eyes. Another stumbled back a step. The distortion wasn't blindness, it was worse. It was visual noise so intense it seemed to interfere with their systems. Leon's log showed frantic updates. Enforcer_status, sensory_overload. Rule_19G, operating at _400% capacity. Warning, rule_integrity_ failing. The headache behind Leon's eyes intensified to a pounding ache. He could feel blood trickling from one nostril. The cost, focus sacrificed to force the glitch. But it was working. The enforcers were disoriented, their perfect coordination shattered. He didn't wait. Clutching the still glitching book, he ran. Not toward the main entrance, but deeper into the library, toward the maintenance sections. His log highlighted a path, route, service_access waste_management sewer_egress. Behind him, the distorted text began to fade. The enforcers would recover. Rule 19G was collapsing, he could see error messages flooding his vision as the rule's code corrupted from his manipulation. Error, memory_leak_detected, error, target_array_corruption, rule_19G, decommissioning_in_10s. He'd broken it. Not just exploited it, shattered it beyond repair. The service door was marked with faded yellow paint. Leon hit the release bar with his shoulder, stumbling into a narrow corridor lined with pipes. The air grew colder, damper. He followed the path down a flight of metal stairs, each step echoing in the confined space. The smell changed, old paper gave way to mildew and stagnant water. Another door, this one heavy steel. He wrenched it open. Darkness. Not complete, faint bioluminescent fungi grew on damp stone walls, casting everything in a sickly green glow. The Academy's sewer system. A channel of slow-moving water flowed down the center, with walkways on either side. The ceiling dripped. Somewhere in the distance, water echoed. Leon leaned against the wall, breathing heavily. The headache was receding to a dull throb. He wiped blood from his nose with his sleeve. The inverted book had stopped glowing, its pages now warped as if exposed to moisture. He dropped it into the water, where it sank with a soft plop. Safe. For now. He closed his eyes, trying to steady his breathing. The silence here was different from the library, not enforced by rules, but by absence. No students, no instructors, no enforcers. Just dripping water and his own heartbeat. His debug log flickered. Not with system messages this time. The text appeared in a different color, amber instead of green. And it wasn't parsing code. It was a message. Offer, alliance. Meet, glitch zone. Coordinates, attached. The coordinates scrolled past, a string of numbers that meant nothing to him, but his log parsed them into a location. Somewhere in the city's outskirts, a place his academy briefings had mentioned only in warnings, the glitch zone. Where rules broke down entirely, where reality frayed at the edges. Who was sending this? Not the system, the formatting was wrong. Not the enforcers, they wouldn't offer alliance. Someone else. Someone who could interface with his log. Leon stared into the darkness, the amber text burning in his vision. The dripping water sounded like a countdown. He was hunted. He was bleeding. He had nowhere to go. And someone, somewhere in the broken places of the world, had just reached out a hand. Leon's journey through the sewers had stretched into days, each step measured against the pounding in his skull. The amber coordinates from his log pulsed like a phantom heartbeat behind his eyes, guiding him through tunnels that smelled of rust and decay. He'd slept in fits, curled against damp concrete, the debug log's interface flickering even in his dreams, lines of corrupted code scrolling through darkness. Hunger gnawed at him, a dull companion to the lingering ache from hacking Rule 19G. His nose had stopped bleeding, but a thin crust of dried blood still clung to his upper lip, a reminder of the price for bending reality. On the third day, the sewer grate he pushed open didn't lead to another alley but to a world unraveling. He emerged into what his log immediately tagged as, Glitch Zone, Sector 7. The air tasted metallic, charged with static that made his hair stand on end. Above, the sky wasn't sky at all, it was a fractured mosaic of pixels, shifting between cerulean blue and sickly green like a corrupted video feed. Buildings in the distance shimmered, their edges bleeding into translucent afterimages. Sounds arrived distorted, a child's laughter from nowhere echoed as if through water, then cut into harsh digital screeches. Leon's breath caught. This wasn't just a place where rules overlapped, it was where reality's code had frayed so badly that the glitches became the landscape. His log flickered with diagnostics. Ambient code instability, 78%. Warnings about spatial anomalies and temporal loops scrolled past, but the coordinates led onward. He moved through streets where puddles reflected skies that didn't match the ones above, where shadows cast by nothing stretched too long. Once, he stepped on a patch of pavement that rippled like liquid, his boots sinking slightly before solidifying, a spatial glitch his log noted as, memory leak in terrain rendering. The disorientation hit him like a wave, his stomach lurched, and the world tilted for a second before righting itself. Minor physical cost, as his body protested the broken physics. Exhaustion weighed on him by the time he reached the coordinates, a makeshift camp nestled in the hollow of a half-glitched warehouse. The structure's walls flickered between solid brick and transparent wireframes, revealing crude shelters inside built from scavenged materials, rusted metal sheets, tarp patched with digital fragments that glowed softly. Figures moved in the dim light, their forms occasionally pixelating at the edges. Leon's log tagged them as, anomalies, unregistered entities. Outcasts, like him, but who'd made this fractured place home. A woman stepped forward as he approached. She wore patched leathers, her hair cropped short, and her eyes held a sharpness that missed nothing. Mara. His log pulled up the alliance message from days prior, matching her face to the encrypted signature. She didn't smile, just assessed him with a gaze that felt like it was parsing code of its own. Leon, she said, voice steady despite the distorted acoustics. Took you long enough. The enforcers have been sweeping the perimeter zones. We lost 2 scouts yesterday to Rule 34C. He nodded, too tired for pleasantries. You offered alliance. We offer survival, Mara corrected, leading him into the camp. The outcasts watched silently, a dozen or so, their ages varying, all marked by the weary resilience of those living on reality's frayed edges. One, a lanky man with goggles that glitched through different lens colors, handed Leon a canteen of water that tasted oddly of citrus and ozone. But survival here requires more than hiding. It requires exploiting the very rules that hunt us. Your log, can it really read the code? Leon took a slow drink, letting the liquid soothe his raw throat. It shows me the errors. The loopholes. Mara's expression didn't change, but something in her posture tightened. Prove it. We have a rule active near the eastern trench. Shadows must not cross water. It's killed 3 of ours this week. They tried to avoid it, obeyed its literal command, but the rule's execution is bugged. If you can bypass it, you're worth the risk of sheltering. The challenge hung in the air, thick with the camp's silent expectation. Leon felt the weight of their stares, not mockery like at the academy, but a desperate hope. These people weren't laughing at an F rank, they were betting their lives on an anomaly. He nodded again, the motion sending a fresh throb through his temples. Show me. The eastern trench was a scar in the ground, filled with murky water that reflected the glitching sky in broken fragments. The rule's presence was palpable, a pressure in the air that made Leon's skin prickle. His log activated automatically, overlaying his vision with lines of luminous code. Rule detected, shadows must not cross water, priority alpha. The script scrolled past, a complex set of conditionals and execution commands, but his eyes immediately caught the flaws. A syntax error in the shadow detection algorithm, a memory leak in the water boundary definition. The rule wasn't just deadly, it was poorly written, its code bloated with redundant loops. It triggers on any shadow intersecting liquid, Mara said, standing back with the others. We've tried covering the water, diverting light sources, nothing works. The rule adapts. Leon knelt by the trench, his reflection glitching in the water's surface. His log highlighted the bug. The rule defined crossing as a shadow centerpoint passing over a liquid plane, but due to the memory leak, it only updated spatial coordinates at specific intervals. A lag in the system. He calculated the timing, the angle. The sun, or what passed for it here, a pixelated orb that stuttered across the sky, cast his shadow toward the water. Step into the puddle, he murmured, more to himself than anyone. At a 45-degree angle, during the coordinate update gap. Mara's eyes narrowed. That'll get you killed. No, Leon said, his voice gaining certainty as the code resolved in his mind. The rule won't recognize it as crossing. The shadow will phase through the detection threshold. He took a breath, ignoring the fresh warning from his log about spatial glitch risk, minor disorientation likely. Then he stepped forward, his boots sinking into the cold water. At the precise moment, he angled his body, letting his shadow stretch across the surface. The world shuddered, a visceral, gut-wrenching twist as space itself glitched around him. His shadow didn't darken the water, instead, it fractured into pixels, passing through the liquid plane like a ghost. For a second, Leon felt his own form waver, his senses scrambling. The trench, the sky, Mara's face, all dissolved into chaotic static before snapping back. He stumbled, catching himself on the muddy bank, his head spinning with the aftereffects. But no death came. No rule activation. The water lay undisturbed, his shadow now safely on the other side, whole again. Silence held for a long moment, broken only by the zone's distorted hum. Then Mara let out a slow breath. You hacked it. Leon straightened, wiping mud from his hands. The disorientation faded to a dull buzz, another minor cost logged in his aching body. I exploited a bug. The rule's still active, but now we know how to bypass it. One of the outcasts, a younger woman with hair that glitched between brown and silver, stepped forward, her eyes wide. Can you teach us? In time, Mara said, her voice carrying a new respect. She offered Leon a hand up. Welcome to the glitch zone, Leon. You've just earned your place. As night fell, the camp lit makeshift fires that cast flickering light against the glitching walls. Leon sat with the outcasts, eating a meal of preserved rations that tasted oddly of nothing, another culinary glitch, his log noted. Mara explained their situation. They scavenged glitched artifacts, avoided enforcer patrols, and used minor rule exploits to gather resources. But survival was precarious, and the enforcers were closing in. Leon's ability could change that, could turn their hiding into something more. He listened, the warmth of the fire doing little to ease the chill in his bones. His log remained active in the corner of his vision, a constant scroll of data. Then, as the pixelated stars above began their stuttering dance, a new alert flashed red. Warning, Enforcer Patrol inbound. Signature, Code Cleaver mobilization. ETA, 2 hours. Leon's blood went cold. He looked up, meeting Mara's eyes across the fire. She'd seen his expression, understood without words. In the distance, beyond the camp's fragile perimeter, lights appeared, cold, white beams cutting through the glitched darkness, moving steadily closer. The enforcers weren't just sweeping, they were hunting, and they'd found the zone. The camp fell silent, the earlier hope hardening into dread. Leon's hands tightened around his canteen, the water inside trembling with the ground's faint vibration. 2 hours. The countdown had begun. The glitch zone's ambient hum of distorted reality shifted first. Leon felt it in his teeth, a sudden, jarring synchronization where floating pixels snapped into rigid grids and the ever-present warble of spatial anomalies flattened into dead silence. Mara's camp, nestled among structures that phased in and out of existence, went still. The outcasts froze mid-motion, their faces paling as the chaotic freedom of the zone was replaced by something worse, unnatural order. "They're here," Mara whispered, her voice barely carrying in the new stillness. Her eyes darted toward the perimeter where the zone's flickering light met the encroaching dark. Enforcers. Their presence forces local rules to stabilize. We're sitting ducks. Leon's heart hammered against his ribs. The 2-hour warning from his debug log had felt abstract until now. Through the hut's glitched wall, a patchwork of solid wood and translucent code fragments, he saw them, silent, masked figures moving with predatory grace. Their black uniforms absorbed light, and silver insignias on their shoulders pulsed with a rhythmic glow that seemed to beat in time with the zone's suppressed distortions. Where they stepped, the ground stopped shimmering. Puddles that had rippled with impossible colors now reflected only dull gray. It was as if reality itself was holding its breath. "Scatter." Mara hissed, but the command came too late. The enforcers moved as one, flowing into the camp with eerie coordination. They didn't run, they glided, their movements too smooth, too perfect. Leon saw one outcast, a man with scarred arms who'd shared rations with him hours earlier, try to bolt toward a cluster of phase-shifting rocks. Before he took 3 steps, the air around him solidified. Rule 12C, Leon's log flickered in his vision, movement exceeding 5 meters per second within stabilized zones triggers temporal friction. The man slowed as if wading through syrup, his face contorted in silent agony as seconds stretched into minutes around him. An enforcer reached him, placed a hand on his shoulder, and he crumpled like a puppet with cut strings. Leon backed into the nearest structure, a hut that Mara had called the gravity glitch. Inside, the air tasted of ozone and static. The floorboards beneath his feet were half-real, their wooden grain dissolving into cascading lines of green code that scrolled upward into nothingness. Gravity here operated in pulses. For 3 heartbeats, everything felt normal, then weightlessness would seize him, lifting dust, debris, and his own body a few inches off the ground before dumping him back down with a jolt. It was disorienting, nauseating, but it was cover. Crouching behind a table that phased in and out of solidity, Leon activated his debug log. The familiar overlay of system text bloomed across his vision, but now it was different. Where before he'd seen isolated error messages and code snippets, now he perceived the enforcers as living data streams. Each figure was wrapped in layers of nested protocols, entity_class, enforcer_alpha, status, synchronized, tether_primary, rule_34f. His log parsed the tether first, a central rule anchoring their coordination. He focused, and the code resolved. Rule 34f, silence must be maintained within 50 meters of enforcer presence. Penalty, auditory overload systemic shutdown. Exceptions, none detected. But there, buried in the input validation subroutine, Leon saw it, a syntax error so glaring it made his breath catch. The rules buffer for processing sound input was hard-coded to accept only meaningful vocalizations as defined by a deprecated lexicon table. The table hadn't been updated in 7 system cycles. It recognized common words, phrases, warnings, anything with semantic weight. But nonsense? Gibberish? The buffer's overflow protection was configured for logical input, not chaotic noise. Outside, the enforcers were methodically rounding up outcasts. Leon watched through a crack in the wall as Mara tried to fight back. She triggered a localized glitch, a pocket of reversed causality where her movements rewound and repeated, but an enforcer simply adjusted, its mask tilting as it recalibrated. Silver tendrils of code extended from its hands, wrapping around the glitch and compressing it into nothing. Mara stumbled, blood trickling from her nose. The mental strain of manipulating reality without a debug log was brutal, Leon realized. She was fighting with broken tools against perfect systems. The gravity in the hut failed again. Leon floated upward, his hair brushing the ceiling that wasn't quite there. His mind raced. The rules flaw was clear: shout something meaningless, something the buffer couldn't parse, and it would overload trying to categorize it. The system would attempt to apply the silence penalty to a non-compliant input, creating a recursive loop that would cascade through the enforcer's shared tether. But the cost: the log estimated vocal strain severe enough to damage his throat. He'd be hoarse, possibly unable to speak for hours. In the glitch zone, that could be a death sentence. Another outcast fell outside, this one a woman who'd shown Leon how to spot safe paths through spatial tiers. An enforcer touched her forehead, and she went rigid, her eyes glazing over as compliance protocols overrode her consciousness. Leon's hands trembled. He wasn't a hero. He was an F-rank laughingstock who'd stumbled into a war he didn't understand. But Mara's people had taken him in. They'd shared their scarce food, their knowledge, their fragile safety. He couldn't just watch them be erased. The gravity returned, slamming him to the floor. Pain shot through his knees. He pushed himself up, inhaled deeply, and stepped to the hut's doorway. The enforcers hadn't noticed him yet, their attention was on Mara, who was backing toward the camp's edge, her hands raised in a gesture of surrender that held no hope. Leon filled his lungs, ignored the warning ache in his temples from earlier hacks, and shouted. It wasn't a word. It wasn't even a sound that belonged to human language. He tore the noise from somewhere deep in his chest, a guttural, chaotic string of syllables that mashed together consonants and vowels with no rhythm or reason, Kraxal Venth Grelshak Ziwayan pattern null echo. The sound ripped through the stabilized air, raw and discordant. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the nearest enforcer twitched. Its mask, previously expressionless, flickered with rapid-fire error messages, input_anomaly, buffer_overflow, parsing_failure. The silver insignia on its shoulder glitched, cycling through colors before settling on a sickly amber. Leon's log lit up with cascading alerts as Rule 34F attempted to process his shout. The buffer tried to categorize it as a vocalization, but the deprecated lexicon had no entry for Kraxal or Grelshak. It defaulted to unknown, triggering an exception handler that itself contained a nested bug, a memory leak that should have been patched cycles ago. The rule began to eat itself. Leon saw it in his vision, lines of code unraveling, recursive loops spawning infinite copies of the same error. The enforcer's coordination shattered. One stumbled, its movements becoming jerky and uncoordinated. Another raised its hands as if to enforce silence, but the gesture triggered a feedback loop. The rule tried to penalize itself, resulting in a burst of silent static that visibly distorted the air around it. Mara didn't hesitate. She whistled, a sharp, piercing sound that cut through the chaos, and the outcasts scattered, melting into the zone's glitched terrain. Leon's throat burned. The vocal strain was worse than he'd anticipated, a searing pain that felt like he'd swallowed glass. When he tried to call out to Mara, only a rasp emerged. He clutched his neck, coughing, and stumbled back into the gravity glitch hut as the enforcers reeled. They weren't defeated, he could see their systems attempting to reboot, to re-establish the tether, but they were disoriented, their perfect synchronization broken into isolated, glitching units. In the chaos, Leon's eyes fell on a fallen enforcer near the hut's entrance. It was one of the first to have been disrupted. It lay on its side, twitching, its mask cracked. From the crack leaked not blood, but streams of faint blue data. And beside its outstretched hand lay a mask. Not the standard enforcer faceplate, but something different, smaller, lighter, forged from a material that seemed to drink the light. It was glitched, he realized. A corrupted artifact. He crawled forward, his throat screaming in protest. The mask felt cool to the touch, almost alive. His log flickered, identifying it before he even focused. Item, debug_mask, status, glitched, effect, plus 10% code visibility. Loot from a fallen enforcer. The thought was absurd, he was looting system enforcers now. But survival in the glitch zone was about tools, and this was a tool. Without thinking, driven by instinct and the desperate need for any advantage, he lifted the mask to his face. It settled against his skin with a faint hum, aligning perfectly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then his vision exploded. Raw system data flooded his senses. Where before his debug log had presented parsed, organized code, now he saw everything, the underlying architecture of reality laid bare. The hut's gravity pulses weren't just glitches, they were failed attempts to reconcile conflicting physics engines. The enforcers outside weren't just enemies, they were walking clusters of permissions and protocols, their very existence defined by nested if-then statements. The air itself was thick with packet loss and memory leaks. It was beautiful and terrifying, a universe written in a language of pure logic that was fraying at the edges. But it was too much. Leon gasped, staggering back as the data overload crashed into his consciousness. His head felt like it was splitting open. Lines of code scrolled across his vision faster than he could parse, layering over each other until the world became a blinding mosaic of information. He couldn't distinguish the hut from the enforcers from his own hands. The mask's enhancement wasn't a gentle boost, it was a fire hose of system truth, and he was drowning in it. He fell to his knees, the mask clinging to his face. Somewhere in the blur, he saw Mara's figure at the edge of the camp, looking back once before disappearing into the glitches. The enforcers were recovering, their movements smoothing back into coordination. And Leon was alone, overwhelmed, his mind screaming under the weight of reality's source code. The world dissolved into a screaming torrent of green text. Leon's vision exploded with raw data streams the moment the debug mask settled against his face. He didn't see Mara's concerned expression or the glitching camp around them, he saw reality's underlying code vomiting itself into his consciousness. Lines of system commands scrolled past at impossible speeds: Rule 12C, Gravity Vector Update, Enforcer Protocol 7 active, Memory Allocation Error, Sector 34F, Shadow Boundary Check failed. He staggered backward, hands flying to the mask. It felt cold and seamless against his skin, like polished obsidian that had somehow fused with his temples. The data wasn't just visual, it was auditory, tactile, a buzzing hive of information that drilled into his skull. He could hear the hexadecimal values of the wind's movement, feel the timestamp of each raindrop hitting the ground, taste the error logs of nearby spatial anomalies. Too much, he tried to say, but his vocal cords were still raw from shouting the nonsense phrase that had disrupted the enforcers. The words came out as a rasping whisper lost in the digital storm. His knees buckled. The ground rushed up to meet him, or rather, the terrain collision detection alert flashed across his vision as he fell. He hit the damp earth of the glitch zone, the impact registering as physical damage, minor, in scrolling text. Around him, the camp's flickering fire appeared as thermal source, unstable, its flames rendered as cascading temperature values rather than light. Mara's hands were on his shoulders. He could see her through the data stream, not as a person, but as entity, human, designation, Mara, faction, outcasts, threat level, low. Her touch registered as contact point, shoulder, pressure, 2.4 newtons. Leon. Take it off. Her voice cut through the noise, though to his enhanced perception it came through as audio waveform, female, stressed, decibel, 68. He fumbled at the mask's edges, but his fingers slipped against its surface. It wasn't just worn, it was integrated. Debug mask synchronization, 43% complete, flashed in his peripheral vision. The more he struggled, the more data flooded in: heart rate, 142 BPM, adrenaline level, elevated, neural load, critical. Can't, he managed to rasp. The word tasted like copper and static. Mara cursed, her expression shifting from concern to calculation. She glanced toward the edge of camp where the last of her outcasts had vanished into the glitching landscape. The enforcer's disrupted coordination wouldn't last forever. Already, distant lights were reorganizing in the fog. "We need to move," she said, her voice low. "But you can't walk like this." Leon forced his eyes shut, but it made no difference. The code stream continued behind his eyelids, projected directly into his visual cortex. He was drowning in information, every sensory input amplified and translated into system data. The smell of ozone from nearby spatial tiers became, atmospheric composition alert, ozone concentration 0.12 ppm, the distant rumble of unstable gravity fields became, gravitational anomaly detected, coordinates 34.7, minus 12.3. Mara hauled him to his feet, his body limp and uncoordinated. "Focus on one thing," she instructed, her grip firm on his arm. "Just one piece of data. Filter the rest out." He tried. He focused on her hand on his arm, contact point, forearm, pressure, 3.1 newtons, and willed everything else to fade. For a moment, the torrent lessened. Then a new alert flashed, rule breach detected, village sector 7B. The data screamed back with renewed intensity. They stumbled through the glitch zone, Mara half carrying him. The landscape around them was a nightmare of corrupted reality, trees whose branches flickered between solid wood and pixelated artifacts, patches of ground that displayed, texture loading error, messages, puddles that reflected not the sky but scrolling lines of environmental code. Leon's every step triggered new data streams, footfall impact, 1.8 g, terrain friction coefficient, 0.4, location update, glitch zone sector 12. After what felt like hours but his internal clock registered as, elapsed time, 47 minutes, 23 seconds, Mara dragged him into a shallow cave formation. The rock walls here showed less glitching than the open zone, their code appeared more stable, with fewer error messages scrolling across their surfaces. "We'll shelter here until you adapt," Mara said, lowering him against the cave wall. "The mask won't kill you, it's designed to enhance, not destroy. But you need to learn to control the flow." Leon slumped against the cold stone, breathing ragged. His debug log, which had been a quiet companion in his mind since the academy, now felt like it was screaming alongside the mask's data stream. The two systems were fighting for dominance in his perception, the log's structured analysis versus the mask's raw information dump. "My log," he croaked. "It filters." Mara's eyes narrowed. "Use it, then. Make it your buffer." He closed his eyes again, this time reaching for the familiar interface of his rule reader's debug log. In his mind's eye, he could see it, a translucent overlay that had always helped him parse cosmic rules. Now it appeared besieged by the mask's green torrent, struggling to maintain its structure against the onslaught. Slowly, painfully, he began redirecting the data flow. Instead of letting every bit of information flood directly into his consciousness, he forced it through the log's parsing functions. The mask's thermal source, unstable, became the log's analyzed output, campfire, temperature fluctuating between 600 to 800 degrees Celsius due to spatial instability. The gravitational anomaly detected became local gravity field variance, plus or minus 0.3 g, cyclical pattern detected. The transformation wasn't perfect. Data still leaked through unfiltered, causing spikes of pain behind his eyes. But gradually, the world began to reassemble itself from the chaos. He could see Mara's face again, not just her data designation, but her actual features, the scar across her cheek from some past encounter, the wary intelligence in her eyes, the tension in her shoulders as she listened for approaching enforcers. "Better?" she asked after a long silence. He nodded weakly. "The log, it's integrating the mask's feed. But it's draining." Mental energy reserve, 68%, flashed in his vision, a new metric his enhanced perception could now track. Every moment of filtering cost him focus, alertness, the mental sharpness he needed to survive. Mara handed him a canteen. "Drink. Then we practice." Days passed in the cave. Mara ventured out periodically to scavenge supplies and scout for enforcer movements, returning with reports of increased patrols but no direct threats to their hiding place. Each time she left, Leon worked on mastering the mask's overload. On the third morning, as dawn light filtered through the cave entrance in distorted, pixelated beams, Mara pointed to a patch of dew gathering on a moss-covered rock just outside. "Rule 8D, she said. "Dew must not be touched after dawn. Standard environmental hazard, touching it triggers rapid cellular crystallization. Kills within minutes. Leon focused his enhanced vision on the dew droplets. Through the mask, he didn't see water, he saw, environmental object, DEW, rule affiliation, 8D, status, active. His log automatically began parsing the rules code, displaying it in his mind's eye. Rule 8D, DEW_contact_protocol. If time, dawn_event. And entity_type equals organic. And contact_ occurs equals true. Then execute cellular_crystallization. Exception, none_defined. But as he studied it, something new happened. The mask's enhanced code visibility revealed layers he'd never seen before. Nestled within the rule's exception handling, which supposedly had none_defined, he could now see ghostly, half-rendered lines of alternative logic. Memory leaks from previous system updates, abandoned code fragments that hadn't been properly purged. There are nested loopholes, he murmured, his voice still hoarse but stronger than before. The exception handling isn't empty. It's corrupted with legacy code. Mara watched intently. Can you exploit it? Leon approached the dew slowly, his every movement tracked by the mask's sensors. Distance to target, 0.8 m, DEW_quantity, 12 milliliters, rule_activation_threshold, contact. He extended a hand, stopping just above the glistening droplets. Through the mask, he could see the rule's activation triggers waiting, a network of conditional statements poised to execute the deadly crystallization command. But in the corrupted exception handling, he identified a fragment of old code, if visualization_countercommand equals true then bypass_protocol. It was a debugging leftover, a test function that should have been removed. The system still recognized it, but only if someone knew to trigger it. Visualization, Leon whispered. He closed his eyes, focusing not on the dew itself but on the mental image of a countercommand. In his mind, he constructed a simple directive, DEW_contact equals permitted. He visualized it as system code, as a legitimate override to Rule 8D. The effort was immense. Mental energy reserve, 54%, dropped to mental energy reserve, 42%, in seconds. His head throbbed with the strain of maintaining both the visualization and the mask's data filtering. But as he held the image firm in his mind, he saw the rule's code react. The visualization_countercommand parameter flickered from false to true. He touched the dew. His fingertips met cold moisture. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then a warning flashed, Rule 8D, activation attempted. But immediately after, legacy_exception_triggered, bypass_protocol engaged. The dew remained just water. No crystallization. No death. Leon let out a shuddering breath and withdrew his hand, staring at his damp fingers. It worked. Mental energy reserve, 38%. The cost was high, he felt foggy, disconnected, as if part of his consciousness had been drained away to power the hack. But he'd done it. He'd safely harvested dew that should have killed him. Mara's expression was unreadable. Show me again. Over the next several days, they practiced on minor rules around their cave. Rule 22H, echoes must not be counted aloud. Leon identified a syntax error in its audio processing and whispered numbers during a glitch in the sound buffer, causing the rule to misfire and temporarily duplicate nearby sounds instead of punishing him. Rule 5F, mushrooms must not be harvested under moonlight. He found a memory leak in its light level detection and gathered edible fungi during a brief pixelation event that confused the system. Each hack cost mental energy. Each success left him more drained than the last. But with each attempt, the mask's integration deepened. Debug mask synchronization, 87% complete. The data streams became less chaotic, more structured. He learned to toggle between levels of information, from raw code to log-analyzed summaries to something approaching normal perception. On the 7th evening, as they shared a meal of scavenged supplies, Mara studied him across their small fire. You're adapting faster than I expected. It's still exhausting, Leon admitted, rubbing his temples. The mask had become a permanent fixture. When he tried to remove it now, his vision blurred with disorientation until he put it back on. It was part of him, as integral as his debug log. Every hack drained something. Alertness. Focus. It's like the system takes payment in mental energy. Everything has a cost, Mara said quietly. Even survival. She was about to say more when her expression hardened. She tilted her head, listening to something beyond the cave. Leon enhanced his auditory processing through the mask, filtering out the constant data stream to focus on external sounds. Footsteps. Multiple sets. Approaching from the northeast. Enforcers, he whispered. Mara shook her head. Too irregular. Too heavy. She moved to the cave entrance, peering out into the glitching twilight. After a moment, she gestured for him to join her. Outside, a group of figures moved through the distorted landscape. They weren't the silent, masked enforcers, these were villagers, their clothes torn and faces etched with panic. They stumbled over glitching terrain, helping each navigate patches of unstable reality. Refugees, Mara murmured. From one of the border villages. As they watched, one of the villagers, a man with a bleeding gash on his forehead, collapsed. The others gathered around him, their voices carrying snippets of terrified conversation. Whole sectors gone. Rule breach unlike anything. Code cleavers mobilizing a full sweep. The last word caught Leon's attention. Code cleaver. The enforcer general from his log's earlier alerts, the one leading patrols against anomalies. Mara's jaw tightened. She waited until the refugees had passed, then turned back to Leon. We need to move. Tonight. Why? Leon asked, though he already suspected the answer. Code Cleaver isn't just another enforcer, Mara said, her voice low and urgent. He's a general. When he mobilizes a sweep, he doesn't send patrols, he brings the full weight of the system's enforcement protocols. He doesn't just hunt anomalies, he purges entire sectors to maintain cosmic order. She began gathering their meager supplies with practiced efficiency. My sources say he's been tracking you since the Academy incident. The hack that decommissioned Rule 19G. That got his attention. The disruption of Rule 34F during the camp raid. That confirmed you're a priority target. Leon felt cold despite the mask's constant data stream. How long do we have? Days, maybe less. Keys. She was cut off by a sudden, sharp ping in Leon's mind. Not from the mask, from his debug log. An alert window forced itself into his vision, amber text stark against the green data stream. Distress signal received. Source, Village Sector 9C, designation, Haven's Edge. Rule breach detected, Category Omega. Estimated survival window, 12 hours. Coordinates attached. The signal repeated, pulsing with urgent rhythm. Through the mask's enhanced perception, Leon could see it wasn't just a message, it was a raw scream of system corruption. The village's reality was coming apart at the seams. Mara saw his expression. What is it? My log, Leon said, his voice barely audible. It's picking up a distress signal. From a village called Haven's Edge. He met her eyes. They're undergoing a rule breach. Category Omega. For the first time since he'd met her, Mara looked truly afraid. Omega-level breaches don't happen. Not anymore. The system contains them before they reach that stage. This one did, Leon said. The signal continued to pulse in his mind, a desperate beacon from a reality unraveling. And my log says they have 12 hours before whatever's happening completes. He looked from Mara's tense face to the cave entrance, where the glitching landscape seemed to pulse in time with the distress signal. Somewhere out there, a village was dying to cosmic rules. And his ability to hack those rules might be the only thing that could save them. But between them and Haven's Edge stood Code Cleaver's mobilizing forces, hunting him as an anomaly. And his mental energy reserves were already depleted from days of practice and adaptation. The mask's data stream flickered, showing him both paths, the enforcer sweep closing in from one direction, the dying village screaming from another. Both were death sentences. Both demanded everything he had learned, everything he had become. He touched the debug mask's smooth surface, feeling its integration with his nervous system. The world was code. The rules were flawed. And he was the error that could exploit them. But even errors had limits. And his were running out. The journey to Haven's Edge took 3 hours through terrain that seemed to rebel against the very concept of travel. Leon walked beside Mara, his boots crunching on ground that occasionally flickered between gravel and polished obsidian. The glitch zone didn't relinquish its hold easily, patches of air shimmered with misplaced pixels, and once, they had to detour around a section of forest where trees grew upside down, their roots clawing at a sky that displayed two different shades of blue. Leon's throat still burned from his last hack. Every swallow felt like dragging sandpaper across raw flesh. He kept his mouth shut, conserving what remained of his voice. The debug mask sat heavy against his face, its synchronization humming at 87% in his peripheral vision, a constant stream of data that he'd learned to filter through his rule reader's debug log. It showed him the world in layers, the physical reality everyone else saw, and beneath it, the green glowing code that governed everything. Mara moved with the practiced silence of someone who'd survived too long in hostile territory. Her eyes scanned not just the physical landscape but the subtle distortions in the air that signaled rule boundaries. She carried a makeshift spear tipped with glitched metal that occasionally phased in and out of existence. "You're pushing yourself too hard," she said without looking at him. Her voice was low, barely above a whisper. "The mask integration isn't complete. I can see it in your eyes, you're still filtering out noise." Leon nodded, not trusting his voice to respond. He focused on the data stream. His log displayed their progress as coordinates updating in real time, along with warnings about minor rules they passed through: wind must not blow eastward between 14 to 1500 hours local time, and footsteps must not create patterns of 3. Simple enough to avoid, but each required mental energy to parse and navigate. As they crested the final hill, Haven's Edge spread below them like a wound in reality. The village had once been picturesque, a collection of stone cottages with thatched roofs clustered around a central square with a well. Now, half the buildings were ruins. Not from fire or physical destruction, but from something more insidious. Walls had dissolved into pixelated static, leaving jagged edges that flickered between solid and not there. The well in the square glowed with an unnatural violet light that pulsed in time with Leon's heartbeat. But the true horror was the echoes. It was just past sunset. The last streaks of orange bled from the sky as indigo crept in from the east. And with the dying light, the air in Haven's Edge began to remember. A woman's scream echoed from the central square, not a recording, but a living sound that hung in the air and thickened. Leon watched through his enhanced vision as the sound wave solidified, taking on mass and texture. The echo became a ghostly figure with the woman's features, transparent but tangible, her hands raised in the same defensive gesture that had created the original sound hours or days before. More echoes manifested. A child's laughter crystallized into a skipping form that phased through a crumbling wall. The clash of weapons, metal on metal, created shimmering combatants locked in eternal struggle near what remained of the village gate. Dozens, then hundreds of echoes populated the ruins, all moving in loops of their original actions. And they were attacking. Leon spotted survivors huddled in the most intact building, a stone chapel with its steeple still mostly whole. Through a shattered stained glass window, he counted maybe 20 people pressed against the walls. The echoes swarmed around the chapel, their ghostly hands scraping against stone, trying to find purchase. Each touch left frost-like patterns that spread like cracks in reality. "Rule display," Leon whispered, the words scraping his throat. His debug log responded instantly, overlaying green text across his vision. "Rule detected, Haven's Edge Local Ordnance Number 7. Description: echoes become tangible after sunset. Parameters: sound reflections within village boundaries gain physical properties proportional to original decibel level. Enforcement: automatic. Penalty for violation: assimilation into echo matrix." Mara gripped her spear tighter. Category Omega. They said 12 hours, but look at the echo density. The survivors won't last another hour. Leon focused deeper, activating the debug mask's enhanced analysis. The rules code unfolded before him, not as simple text, but as interlocking structures of logic and enforcement. He saw the main function that governed echo manifestation, the subroutines that determined tangibility thresholds, the error-checking protocols that should have prevented this cascade failure. And there, buried 3 layers deep in the memory management section, a leak. The rule stored echoes in a rotating array with fixed allocation. Each new echo pushed the oldest out to make room. But the deallocation function had a flaw: it only marked memory as free without actually clearing the data. Over time, as echoes accumulated, the array filled with ghost data that still held partial coherence. When Sunset triggered the tangibility protocol, it pulled from the entire array, not just the active entries. The village wasn't just experiencing today's echoes. It was reliving every sound that had ever bounced off its stones. Memory leak in echo storage array, Leon rasped, pointing toward the chapel. The system's trying to manifest everything at once. It's overloading itself. Can you exploit it? Mara asked. Leon's throat tightened at the question. He ran simulations in his log, testing approaches. The obvious solution was to create a sound so loud it would flood the array with new data, forcing a purge of old entries. But the rule had safeguards. It would simply expand allocation to accommodate, making the problem worse. No, he needed something smarter. Something that would confuse the system at a fundamental level. He studied the code again, tracing execution paths. The rule's logic had a peculiar blind spot. It treated all sounds equally for storage, but for manifestation, it filtered based on semantic coherence. Meaningful sounds, speech, screams, music, manifested more completely than random noise. The system assumed random noise was irrelevant and gave it lower priority in the tangibility calculations. But what if he created a sound that was both maximally loud and semantically contradictory? A statement that referenced its own existence while denying it. The system would try to parse it, allocate memory for it, then hit logical recursion as it attempted to resolve the contradiction. Need to create paradoxical sound, Leon whispered, each word an effort. Flood the array with unsolvable data. System will crash trying to process it. Mara's eyes narrowed. Your voice can't take much more strain. The last hack nearly tore your vocal cords. I know. He didn't have a choice. The echoes were closing in on the chapel. One had managed to phase partway through the wall, its translucent hands reaching for a child pressed against the interior. The child screamed, and that scream birthed another echo right inside the building, creating a feedback loop. Leon descended the hill, Mara at his side. They moved through the outskirts of the village, avoiding the densest clusters of echoes. The ghostly figures paid them little attention, they were fixated on the chapel, drawn to the living sounds within. As they reached the village square, Leon positioned himself at the center, near the glowing well. The debug mask showed him the rule's active boundaries, a shimmering dome of energy that encompassed the entire settlement. This close to Sunset's trigger, the dome pulsed with each new echo manifestation. Ready? Mara asked, her spear held defensively. Leon took a deep breath, ignoring the fire in his throat. He focused his log, using the mask's enhanced visualization to construct the perfect contradictory statement. It needed to be loud enough to register as high priority, complex enough to require extensive parsing, and logically impossible to resolve. He opened his mouth, and his voice emerged as a raw, pain thing. This statement cannot be stored as an echo because any attempt to echo it would create a paradox that refutes its own existence while simultaneously affirming it through the very act of echoing. The words tore from him, each syllable amplified by some property of the glitched well beside him. They echoed, of course they echoed, bouncing off ruined walls and returning changed, distorted. And the system tried to process them. Leon watched through his enhanced vision as the rule's code lit up, pathways overloading with the computational burden. The statement contained multiple nested contradictions. It claimed it couldn't be stored while being stored, referenced its own echoing while denying echoability, created a logical loop that had no exit condition. The echo storage array attempted to allocate memory. The sound was loud, maximum priority. The semantic parser tried to extract meaning. Contradiction detected. Error handling routines activated. The parser tried again. Same contradiction. Error routines reactivated. Each cycle consumed more memory, more processing power. The array's leak meant old data wasn't being properly cleared, so each new allocation had to find fresh space in an increasingly fragmented memory landscape. Leon's voice gave out halfway through the second repetition. He continued mouthing the words silently, his log projecting the intended sound waves directly into the rule's input buffer through some glitch in the mask's integration. Green code streamed from his position, visible only to him, carrying the paradoxical statement into the system's heart. The echoes flickered. First individually, then in waves. The ghostly woman near the chapel pixelated at the edges, her form breaking into squares of color that dispersed like confetti. The laughing child dissolved into static snow. The combatants by the gate unraveled into strands of incoherent noise that faded to silence. But the system fought back. Enforcement protocols activated, trying to stabilize the array. Error messages flooded Leon's vision: memory allocation failure, semantic parser stack overflow, contradiction resolution timeout. He pushed harder, straining not just his voice but his mind. The debug mask heated against his skin, its synchronization percentage fluctuating wildly: 85%, 90%, 82%. Raw system data threatened to overwhelm his filters, showing him the cosmic code in its unfiltered chaos: infinite loops, null pointers, memory addresses that led nowhere. Mara grabbed his arm, her grip firm. "It's working, but you're bleeding." Leon touched his nose. His fingers came away red. The mental strain was manifesting physically now, a price for hacking reality at this scale. In the chapel, the survivors noticed the change. The echoes phasing through the walls were disintegrating, losing cohesion. One man dared to peer through a window, his eyes wide with desperate hope. Leon focused on the final push. He visualized the memory leak not as a flaw to be avoided, but as a weapon. Using his log, he directed the paradoxical statement not just into active memory, but into the leaked sections, the ghost data that shouldn't have been accessible. He infected the entire array, corrupting even the deallocated entries. The system shuddered. A visible wave of distortion passed through the village. Reality itself seemed to stutter, the ruins flickered between their current state and momentary restorations of wholeness, as if the village was remembering itself before the rule breach. The glowing well dimmed, then flared bright violet before settling to a weak pulse. And the echoes vanished. Not faded. Not dispersed. Vanished as if they'd never been. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the wind whistling through broken walls and the distant sound of Mara's breathing. Leon collapsed to his knees, his throat utterly silent now. When he tried to speak, nothing emerged, not even a whisper. The strain had been too much. Temporary muteness, his log diagnosed, with a 68% probability of vocal recovery within 48 hours. But they had time. Mara helped him up as the chapel doors creaked open. The survivors emerged cautiously, 23 men, women, and children blinking in the twilight as if waking from a nightmare. They gathered around Leon and Mara, their expressions shifting from fear to disbelief to dawning gratitude. An older woman with hands worn from labor approached first. "You stopped the ghosts," she said, her voice trembling. We thought we were going to become echoes ourselves." Mara handled the explanations while Leon recovered, sipping from a water skin that did nothing for his throat but at least moistened his mouth. The survivors told of how the rule had activated 3 days earlier, how they'd watched neighbors consumed by their own echoes, how the chapel had become their final refuge. As night fully descended, they built a small fire in the most sheltered corner of the square, using debris that wouldn't trigger any residual rules. The warmth was a comfort against the glitch zone's unnatural chill. Leon sat apart, monitoring his log. The rule was still active but dormant, its memory array corrupted beyond functionality. It would take time for the system to garbage collect the corrupted data and reboot the ordnance. Hours, maybe days. The survivors could evacuate before then. That's when he noticed the child. A boy of maybe 8 years, sitting alone near the broken well, drawing patterns in the dust with a stick. He wasn't with any of the family groups. His clothes were too clean for someone who'd been trapped for days. Leon approached slowly, his movements careful. The boy looked up, his eyes holding a knowledge that didn't belong in a child's face. "You're the one who reads the rules," the boy said, his voice barely audible. Leon nodded, pointing to his throat and shaking his head. The boy leaned closer, his whisper carrying on the night air. "They're looking for it, you know. The code cleaver. He's not just sweeping for anomalies. He's searching for the heart of the system." Leon froze. His log, which had been running quiet diagnostics, suddenly flashed crimson. Term detected, heart_relic. Classification, cosmic artifact, tier Omega. Description, theoretical core component of reality's governing system. Capable of rewriting fundamental rules at the source code level. Status, location unknown. Enforcer interest, confirmed. General Code Cleaver has prioritized acquisition. The boy continued, his words spilling faster now as if he'd been holding them back for too long. My grandfather was a system architect before the fracturing. He told me stories. The heart isn't a thing you find, it's a thing that finds you when reality is breaking. And reality is breaking everywhere now. Leon's log updated again, text scrolling rapidly. Quest generated, locate heart_relic. Objective, find the heart of the system before Code Cleaver's forces. Reward, potential to alter cosmic rules at fundamental level. Danger level, extreme, multiple hostile factions will be pursuing same objective. Note, artifact may be sentient. Artifact may have its own agenda. The boy stood, brushing dust from his pants. He's coming here, you know. Code Cleaver. The sweep isn't random. Haven's edge is on the path to where he thinks the heart is hidden. Then, as if he'd said too much, the boy turned and walked into the shadows between two ruined buildings. When Leon tried to follow, the space was empty, just another glitch in the zone. Mara approached, her expression grim. What did he say? Leon couldn't answer with words. Instead, he projected the log's quest notification onto a flat stone using the debug mask's limited holographic capability. The green text glowed in the darkness. Quest, locate heart_relic. Danger, extreme. Mara read it, then looked toward where the boy had vanished. We need to move. If Code Cleaver is coming here. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Around them, the survivors were gathering what little they could carry, preparing to abandon the village that had almost become their tomb. The fire cast long shadows that danced across ruins that might never be rebuilt. And in the distance, beyond the glitch zone's shimmering boundary, something moved, lights in formation, approaching with purpose. Leon's throat might have been silent, but his mind was screaming with new questions. What was the heart of the system? Why did a child know about it? And how much time did they have before Code Cleaver arrived, not just to purge anomalies, but to claim a relic that could rewrite reality itself? He touched the debug mask, now cooled against his skin. Its synchronization read 87% again, stable. For now. But he had the feeling that percentage would need to reach 100% very, very soon. The air in the glitch zone tasted of ozone and static, a metallic tang that clung to the back of Leon's throat. He sat on a makeshift crate in what remained of Mara's camp, the temporary muteness from hacking the echo rule still a raw ache in his vocal cords. Around him, the 23 survivors from Haven's Edge huddled in small groups, their faces pale with exhaustion and lingering terror. The rescued villagers whispered among themselves, casting furtive glances at Leon, some with gratitude, others with suspicion. Mara's faction members moved through the camp with a new tension in their steps. Leon watched them from beneath the hood of his scavenged jacket, his rule reader's debug log running a passive scan of the environment. Green lines of code flickered at the edges of his vision, the debug mask's 87% synchronization making the data streams clearer but no less overwhelming. He could see the glitching rules of the zone as nested loops and conditional statements. Gravity may invert within 3-meter radius appeared as a recursive function with a broken exit condition, while shadows must not overlap for more than 5 seconds manifested as a timer variable with corrupted memory allocation. Mara stood by the central fire pit, her arms crossed. The flickering light cast deep shadows across her face, emphasizing the hard lines around her mouth. She was speaking in low tones with 2 of her lieutenants, a burly man named Torin whom Leon had seen wield a glitch-altered hammer, and a sharp-eyed woman called Lissa who moved with the predatory grace of someone who'd survived too many rule breaches. We have him now, Torin's voice carried just enough for Leon to catch. The artifact quest is real. The child wasn't lying. Lissa's response was a hissed whisper. And what makes you think he'll share it? He's an anomaly, not one of us. Leon's fingers tightened around the edge of the crate. The wood splintered under his grip, tiny fragments digging into his skin. He focused on his breathing, on the steady stream of system data his log was parsing. The debug mask showed him the emotional states of those around him as fluctuating variables, Mara's ambition spiking at 0.87 on a normalized scale, Torin's greed registering as a persistent memory leak in his behavioral algorithms, Lissa's fear manifesting as error handling routine stuck in infinite loops. He saved the village, Mara said, her voice carrying an edge Leon hadn't heard before. That proves his value. It proves he's a tool, Torin countered. One we can use to find the heart before Code Cleaver does. Imagine having that power. We could rewrite the rules of this entire zone. Make it ours. Leon's throat constricted, the phantom pain of his strained vocal cords reminding him of the cost of every hack. He thought of the Echo Rules memory leak, of how he'd flooded it with paradoxical data until his voice gave out completely. The villagers in the chapel had stared at him with awe when the pixelating ghosts vanished, but their expressions had shifted to something colder during the trek back to the glitch zone. They saw what he was, not a hero, but a glitch in the system. As night deepened, the camp's atmosphere grew thicker with unspoken tension. Leon practiced minor visualizations to maintain his focus, tracing countercommands in the air with his mind's eye. The rule, campfires must not exceed 1 meter in height, appeared as a simple height check function. He could see 3 different syntax errors in its conditional statements that would allow a 2-meter flame if someone stacked the wood just right. Each mental exercise drained him, leaving behind a faint headache that pulsed behind his eyes. It was Lissa who approached him first, her movements too casual, too studied. "Leon," she said, her voice artificially light. "We found something you should see. A glitch trap that might be related to the heart's location." Leon's log immediately flagged the statement as, potential deception, 92% confidence. He stood slowly, his body protesting every movement. The debug mask showed him Lissa's biometrics, elevated heart rate, micro-expressions indicating stress, a telltale spike in cortisol levels. She was lying, but the trap might be real enough. She led him to the eastern edge of the camp where the zone's glitches were more pronounced. The ground here shimmered with visual artifacts, patches of grass rendered in low-resolution textures that flickered between green and static gray. In the center of a clearing stood a perfect circle of stones, each one glowing with a faint blue light. The air within the circle wavered like heat haze on a summer road. "Step inside," Lissa said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "We think it's a temporal marker. Might show you something about the artifact." Leon's log activated fully, flooding his vision with analysis. The circle wasn't just glowing stones, it was active rule code, a nested function executing in real time. He read the lines as they scrolled past his consciousness. Rule identified, time flows backward within this circle. Description, localized temporal inversion field. Duration, indefinite until exit condition met. Parameters, radius equals 2.3 meters. Temporal coefficient equals -1.0x standard flow. Warning, biological entities entering field will experience cognitive temporal dissonance. Memory degradation possible. Torin emerged from the shadows behind him, his hammer resting on his shoulder. "Go on, anomaly. Show us what you can do." Leon's mind raced. The rule was elegantly simple in its coding, a single variable controlling temporal direction, tied to a geo-fenced area. But his log had already found the loophole. The rule checked for physical presence within the circle, but it didn't verify the occupant's subjective experience of time. The system assumed anyone inside would perceive time flowing backward because that's what the rule dictated. He could exploit that assumption. Taking a deep breath that did nothing to calm the pounding in his chest, Leon stepped into the circle. Immediately, the world twisted. The camp behind him appeared to move in reverse, Torin stepping backward into the shadows, Lissa's mouth forming silent words that unraveled into nothing. The sensation was nauseating, like being on a ship in a storm while the horizon tilted in impossible directions. His own body felt wrong, as if his muscles were trying to remember movements he hadn't made yet. But Leon focused. He planted his feet firmly on the shimmering ground within the circle and began counting in his mind. 1, 2, 3. Each number was a defiance against the backward flow. He visualized them as forward-moving counters in the system's memory, creating a parallel timeline that contradicted the rule's directive. The debug mask showed him the conflict in real time, the temporal inversion function trying to process his forward-counting consciousness as invalid data, throwing exception errors that cascaded through the rule's execution stack. 4, 5, 6. Cognitive dissonance slammed into him like a physical blow. His brain screamed with contradictory signals, one part insisting time was flowing backward based on sensory input, another clinging to the forward count as objective truth. The pain was immediate and blinding, a migraine that started behind his eyes and spread through his skull in waves of white-hot agony. He could feel blood vessels throbbing in his temples, each heartbeat sending fresh spikes of torment through his nervous system. 7. 8. 9. The circle's glow flickered. The stones began to vibrate, their blue light shifting to an unstable magenta. System errors scrolled through Leon's vision, temporal paradox detected, rule integrity compromised, exception, subjective time contradicts objective flow. 10. With a sound like shattering glass, the circle collapsed. The glowing stones went dark, their magic broken. The temporal inversion field dissolved into harmless static that crackled in the air for a moment before fading. Leon stumbled out of the circle, clutching his head. The migraine was a living thing inside his skull, pulsing with every heartbeat. He could barely see through the pain, his vision swimming with afterimages of the glitching code. But he was alive. He was unharmed physically, save for the cognitive toll. Torin stared at him, the hammer slipping from his grip to thud against the ground. Lissa took a step back, her face pale. You broke it," she whispered. Leon didn't have the voice to respond even if he wanted to. He turned away from them, the movement sending fresh waves of agony through his head, and walked back toward the center of camp on unsteady legs. Every step was an effort of will against the pounding in his skull. He found Mara by the fire pit alone, the other faction members having melted away into the shadows. She didn't look surprised to see him. "They tried to trap you," she said, her voice flat. Leon nodded, the motion sending fresh spikes of pain through his temples. He gestured toward the eastern edge of camp, then tapped his head to indicate the migraine. Mara's expression softened for just a moment before hardening again. "Torin and Lissa have been pushing for weeks. They think the glitch zone could be a kingdom if we had the right tools. The heart of the system." She trailed off, staring into the flames. When that child mentioned it, something changed in them. In all of us, maybe. Leon sat heavily on a crate, pressing the heels of his hands against his eyes. The migraine was beginning to recede from its peak, leaving behind a dull, persistent ache. Through the pain, his log continued running analysis on Mara, her ambition variable still high, but now tempered with something new. Regret, perhaps. Or calculation. "I won't apologize for wanting power," Mara said quietly. "In this world, power is survival. But I saw what you did in Haven's Edge. You didn't rewrite the rule for yourself. You broke it to save people who would never thank you." She met his eyes. Torin and Lissa would have used the heart to make themselves gods. I might have let them. Leon's fingers twitched, wanting to form words he couldn't speak. He settled for a slow, deliberate nod. Understanding, not forgiveness. "They're gone now," Mara continued. "Took a dozen of the more ambitious ones and left. Probably heading deeper into the zone, looking for other ways to find the artifact." She paused. "I'm still here." Before Leon could process what that meant, the world changed. The air went still. Not quiet, still. The ever-present background hum of glitching rules vanished, replaced by an absolute silence that felt heavier than any sound. The campfire's flames froze in place, their flickering motion arrested mid-dance. Even the wind died, leaving the banners and tarps hanging limp and motionless. Leon's log screamed with warnings. System intrusion detected. External stabilization field active. Local rules being overridden. Then the enforcers appeared. They didn't emerge from the shadows or descend from the sky, they were simply there, a dozen of the silent, masked figures standing in a perfect circle around the camp's perimeter. Their featureless masks reflected the frozen firelight, giving nothing away. But unlike the enforcers from Mara's camp breach, these didn't move with coordinated purpose. They stood utterly still, as if waiting for something. Or someone. The ground began to tremble. Not with earthquake violence, but with a deep, resonant vibration that traveled up through Leon's bones. The glitching rules of the zone reacted violently. A patch of inverted gravity nearby began flashing between normal and reverse 10 times a second, creating a strobing effect that hurt to look at. The shadows must not overlap rule broke completely, with shadows stretching and merging into impossible shapes that crawled across the ground like living things. And then he arrived. Code Cleaver didn't walk into the camp. The space before the fire pit simply warped, reality folding in on itself like crumpled paper, and he was there. A towering figure clad in armor that seemed to drink the light, leaving only impressions of sharp angles and brutal lines. His helmet was featureless save for a single vertical slit where eyes might be, glowing with a cold blue light that cast no illumination on the ground around him. His mere presence caused the system to scream. Leon's vision flooded with error messages, rule contradiction, memory corruption, integrity failure. The debug mask showed him Code Cleaver's code, and it was unlike anything he'd seen before. Not a person with system permissions, but a walking exception handler. A function whose sole purpose was finding and eliminating errors in the cosmic code. Errors like Leon. Mara was on her feet, a knife appearing in her hand as if by magic. But she didn't attack. She couldn't. The stabilization field emanating from Code Cleaver held her in place, her muscles straining against invisible bonds. Leon tried to stand, but the same force pressed him down onto the crate. His migraine flared anew, the pain mixing with the overwhelming system data until he could barely think. Through the agony, his log focused on Code Cleaver, analyzing, parsing, trying to find something, anything, he could use. The Enforcer General turned his helmet toward Leon. The blue slit seemed to bore into him, seeing past flesh and bone to the glitching code beneath. Leon's rule reader's debug log displayed the final analysis in stark, uncompromising text. Entity identified, Code Cleaver. Threat level, catastrophic. Active rule, all anomalies must be purged. Execution status, imminent. The air crackled with wrongness as Code Cleaver took his first step toward the camp. Leon's vision, still filtered through the debug mask's chaotic streams, didn't show a man walking, it showed reality itself buckling. Green code lines warped around the Enforcer General's boots, bending away as if repelled by some fundamental force. Mara's faction members, those who hadn't left with Torin and Lissa, scrambled into defensive positions. One man, Leon's log tagged him as a C-rank glitch hunter named Ren, hurled a shard of crystallized error data. It was a weaponized fragment of a broken rule, sharp enough to slice through steel. The shard struck Code Cleaver's chest and dissolved into harmless pixels, scattering like digital confetti. The general didn't even glance down. Another attacker, a woman with tattoos that shimmered with unstable code, tried to invoke a local glitch rule, silence becomes solid here. Her voice rose in a chant, and the air thickened into translucent barriers. Code Cleaver walked through them. The barriers shattered with the sound of breaking glass, then reformed behind him, now tinted a sickly crimson, corrupted by his passage. He moved with the inevitability of a system update, each footfall causing the ground to briefly flicker between dirt and raw binary. Leon's migraine pulsed behind his eyes, a dull, throbbing counterpoint to the visual noise. His throat remained tight, useless, the muteness from hacking the echo rule in Haven's Edge felt like a physical gag. He could only watch as the enforcers, silent, masked figures in gray uniforms, fanned out behind their general, their movements synchronized like programmed routines. Mara grabbed his arm, her fingers digging in. "Run," she mouthed, her face pale. "Now." She didn't wait for a response, yanking him toward the edge of the camp where the glitch zone's terrain grew wilder. Leon stumbled after her, his legs protesting the sudden motion. The camp dissolved into chaos behind them, shouts, the crackle of misfiring glitch weapons, the eerie silence of the enforcers advancing. He glanced back once. Code Cleaver had reached the central fire pit. He didn't attack the remaining faction members, he simply stood there, and the fire guttered out, not from wind but from a command line that overwrote combustion equals true to false. The flames died mid-flicker, leaving behind cold, gray ash. Then the general turned his head, and though his face was hidden behind a featureless metal mask, Leon felt the weight of that gaze, a targeting algorithm locking on. The debug mask flared in his vision, synchronization holding at 87%, but now throwing urgent warnings in crimson text, anomaly detected, purge protocol active. Threat level, catastrophic. Estimated time to termination, 12 minutes. Leon ran faster. The glitch zone beyond the camp was a tapestry of broken reality. Here, the rules weren't just deadly, they were unstable, layered over each other in conflicting loops. The ground underfoot shifted, one moment it was spongy moss that emitted faint musical notes when stepped on, a minor rule, footfalls must harmonize, the next it was cracked obsidian that reflected a sky that wasn't there, a sky of scrolling command lines. Trees grew in jagged, polygonal shapes, their leaves flickering between green and error message yellow. The air smelled of ozone and decaying data. Mara led them through a narrow canyon where the walls whispered. Not with wind, but with fragments of forgotten rules, shall not cross the river at midnight, the third step always lies, beware the color blue when it rains, the whispers layered into a dissonant choir. Leon's log parsed them automatically, tagging each as, rule fragment, inactive/broken. But his focus was on the pursuit. He could hear it now, not footsteps, but a low hum, like servers cooling. The enforcers were coming. They didn't run, they advanced at a steady, unhurried pace, their presence causing the glitch terrain to stabilize momentarily. A patch of flickering grass behind them solidified into uniform green blades. A floating rock that had been orbiting a tree stump crashed to the ground, obeying gravity perfectly. Code Cleaver was purging the glitches just by walking through them. Mara skidded to a halt at a fork in the canyon. Both paths looked identical, winding, shadowed, lined with more whispering stone. But Leon's mask-enhanced vision saw the difference. The left path glowed with a faint, consistent blue aura, a stable rule in effect. The right path shimmered with erratic rainbow static, its code a tangled mess. Mara pointed left. Stable route, fewer surprises, she gasped, her breath ragged. Leon shook his head violently, pointing right. His log was already analyzing the shimmering path. It identified the active rule, rule active, paths must not be retraced. Description: any attempt to walk backward or repeat a step on this path triggers instant spatial collapse. Severity: lethal. But beneath that, in smaller, almost hidden text, the log showed something else: exception detected, recursive loop protocol. Loop condition: if movement forms a closed spiral with precise angular deviation of 137.5 degrees per iteration, path rule interprets as single, non-retraced journey. Note: exception is legacy code from system's self-repair modules. Exploit possible but physically demanding. Leon grabbed Mara's wrist, pulling her toward the right path. He couldn't speak, but he tapped his temple, then gestured at the shimmering air. Her eyes widened in understanding, she'd seen him hack rules before. They plunged into the rainbow static. Immediately, the world twisted. The canyon walls seemed to stretch and compress, their whispers rising to a frantic babble. The ground felt spongy again, but now it pulsed with a slow, rhythmic beat, like a heartbeat. Leon's log overlaid a grid on his vision, marking each footstep with coordinates. He had to walk a spiral, a specific, mathematically perfect spiral. One misstep, and the rule would trigger, collapsing space around them into a singularity. He took the first step, planting his boot on a patch of moss that glowed faintly green. The log marked it as, origin point. Mara followed, her movements cautious. Behind them, the hum grew louder. Leon risked a glance back. The enforcers had reached the fork. Code Cleaver stood at the entrance to the right path, his masked face tilting as if analyzing the glitch code. He didn't enter. Instead, he raised a hand, and two enforcer squads split off, moving to flank the canyon via the stable left path. They were trying to cut them off. No time to think. Leon focused on the spiral. The second step had to be at a 137.5-degree angle from the first. He turned, his body protesting, the migraine spiked, sending jagged pain through his skull. His muscles ached from days of tension and the recent temporal hack. But he stepped. The ground held. Mara mimicked his movements, her own training in glitch navigation making her a quick study. She didn't ask questions, she just followed, her breath coming in sharp gasps. The third step. Fourth. The spiral began to take shape, a slow, winding curve that seemed to defy the canyon's natural geometry. With each step, the rainbow static intensified, coalescing into visible strands of code that wrapped around their legs like ethereal vines. The strands didn't hurt, but they hummed with potential energy, the rules enforcement mechanism, waiting for a mistake. Leon's log tracked their progress, spiral completion, 12%. Angular deviation, within tolerance. Warning, physical exhaustion detected. He was sweating now, his shirt sticking to his back. The precise movements required constant, minute adjustments, a slight turn of the ankle here, a shift in balance there. It was like dancing on a knife's edge while carrying a boulder. Step 5. 6. 7. The enforcers were gone from sight, but the hum was still there, now coming from both ahead and behind. They were being surrounded. The canyon walls here were closer, the whispers louder. One fragment stood out, the heart beats where the code sleeps. Leon filed it away. His log flickered, updating, spiral completion, 45%. Estimated time to enforcer encirclement, 8 minutes. Mara stumbled on the 8th step, her boot catching on a root that hadn't been there a second before, a minor glitch. She lurched forward, threatening to break the spiral. Leon grabbed her arm, hauling her back into position. The rainbow strands around her leg tightened, glowing brighter. For a terrifying second, he thought the rule would trigger. But the strands relaxed. The log showed, deviation corrected. Mara shot him a grateful, wide-eyed look. They kept moving. Step 9. 10. 11. Leon's legs burned. Each lift of his foot felt like dragging iron weights. His breath came in ragged, silent heaves. The muteness was a blessing now, he couldn't waste energy on sound. But his mind raced. The spiral was working. The path beneath them was no longer solid ground, it had become a swirling vortex of light and code, the canyon walls blurring into streaks of color. They weren't walking on dirt anymore, they were walking on the rule itself, bending it to their will. Step 12. 13. 14. Spiral completion, 78%. The hum of the enforcers was suddenly everywhere, vibrating through the air. Leon saw flickers of gray at the edges of his vision, shapes moving through the stable terrain parallel to them. Code Cleaver's forces were closing in. They had minutes, maybe less. Step 15. 16. 17. The spiral tightened, the turns growing sharper. Leon's body screamed in protest. His vision swam, the debug mask's data streams blurring with fatigue. But he pushed on, focusing on the log's guidance like a lifeline. Mara kept pace, her own movements growing sluggish but still precise. Step 18. 19. Spiral completion, 94%. The rainbow strands were now thick as ropes, pulsing with light. The canyon had dissolved entirely, they were moving through a tunnel of pure, chaotic code. The whispers had become a roar of binary. Then, the 20th step. Leon placed his foot down, completing the final 137.5-degree turn. The spiral closed. For a moment, nothing happened. The world held its breath. Then, the rule broke. The code around them didn't just shatter, it rewrote itself. The rainbow strands snapped, unraveling into blinding white light. The log flashed, exception triggered, recursive loop detected. Path rule interpreting movement as single journey. Spatial collapse averted. Alternate output, random teleportation initiated. The light swallowed them. There was no sound, no sensation of movement, just a sudden, wrenching dislocation, as if reality had skipped a frame. Leon felt weightless, untethered. Then, gravity returned, and he crashed onto hard, cold stone. The impact knocked the air from his lungs. He lay there, gasping silently, his body a single ache of exhaustion. The rainbow light faded, replaced by dim, ambient glow. Slowly, he pushed himself up. Mara was beside him, already on her feet, her hands braced on her knees as she breathed heavily. They were no longer in the canyon. They stood in a vast, cavernous space, an ancient ruin. The walls were made of seamless black stone, etched with intricate patterns that weren't carvings but embedded code lines, dormant and gray. The air was still, cold, and carried the scent of dust and ozone. Overhead, a ceiling arched high above, supported by pillars that flickered with faint, periodic light, like sleeping servers. The floor was smooth, covered in a thin layer of grit that crackled underfoot. This place felt old, older than the glitch zone, older than the academy. It felt foundational. Leon's log, which had been buzzing with warnings, now chimed softly. New text scrolled across his vision, green and urgent, location identified, ancient system nexus. Detecting power signature, artifact class. Signature match, heart of the system, relic capable of rewriting cosmic rules. Beacon active, signature origin 300 meters north-northeast. But beneath that, in stark red, another alert appeared, warning, multiple enforcer squads converging. Squad signatures detected, 8 units. Estimated time until encirclement, 1 hour. Recommendation, immediate evasion or preparation for termination protocol. Leon stared at the words, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten. The heart was here. And so were the enforcers. They hadn't escaped, they'd just bought a little time. Mara straightened, following his gaze into the gloom. "What is it?" she whispered, her voice barely audible in the vast silence. Leon pointed north-northeast, toward a darker archway in the ruins wall. Then he tapped his temple and held up one finger. 1 hour. Her face hardened. Around them, the dormant code on the walls seemed to stir, as if sensing the approaching threat. The ancient ruin swallowed them in a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight. Dust motes danced in shafts of pale, sourceless light that cut through the darkness, illuminating floating fragments of stone and strange, geometric carvings that pulsed with a faint, sickly green luminescence. Leon's breath came in shallow, silent gasps. The muteness was a cage around his throat, but his mind raced, the rule reader's debug log scrolling with constant, frantic updates. Rule detected, local zone, silent sanctum. Rule text, light must not cast shadows. Enforcement, instant termination of Shadowcaster. Analysis, photonic array subroutine with no recursive failsafe. He grabbed Mara's arm, his fingers digging into the rough fabric of her sleeve. She flinched, her eyes wide in the gloom. He pointed urgently at one of the light shafts, then at the floor. Where the light touched the dusty stone, the ground was featureless, devoid of any dark shape. No shadow. He mimed walking, then pointed again at the light, shaking his head violently. Mara understood. Her face tightened. She gave a sharp nod, her hand dropping to the hilt of her short blade. They moved, Leon leading with agonizing slowness, his eyes fixed on the log's visual overlay. It painted the ruin in layers of translucent code. The light shafts weren't just illumination, they were active rule enforcement zones, shimmering fields of conditional statements. If, object_n_light, and, shadow_detected, then execute, nullify. The nullify command glowed with a malevolent red intensity. They had to navigate the patches of absolute darkness between the lights, where the rule didn't apply. But the darkness wasn't empty. The log flickered with warnings of dormant structural instabilities, collapsed arches held together by fraying spatial coordinates, pits that weren't pits but void_data entries. One misstep could trigger a localized collapse. Leon's body ached from the exhaustion of the spiral walk hack, and a dull throb persisted behind his eyes from the migraine. The 87% synchronization of the debug mask hummed against his temples, a constant, low-grade buzz that filtered the raw data of the glitching world. He used it now, not to see through the darkness, but to see the darkness itself, the absence of light rendered as a complex mesh of safe, albeit unstable, pathways. They crept past a towering, broken statue of a featureless humanoid, its surface crawling with error glyphs. Mara's boot scuffed a loose stone. It skittered into a beam of light. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, with a soundless flash, the stone and the tiny shadow it had begun to cast dissolved into a shower of static pixels that faded to nothing. Mara froze, her knuckles white on her blade. Leon felt a cold sweat break out on his back. The rule was brutally efficient. It took them 20 minutes of torturous navigation to cross the first chamber. Leon's legs trembled with the strain of precise, controlled movements. The log's quest marker for the heart of the system pulsed insistently, a beacon drawing them deeper. They passed through a crumbling archway into a narrower corridor. Here, the rule changed. Rule detected, corridor whispering gallery. Rule text, knowledge must not be spoken aloud. Enforcement, vocal cord nullification via sonic resonance subroutine. Analysis, active listener protocol. Frequency lock, 440 Hz plus or minus 5 Hz. The air in the corridor felt thick, pressurized. The walls were smooth, polished stone that reflected their distorted images. Leon's log highlighted the subroutine, an invisible web of auditory sensors waiting for spoken words that contained declarative statements. To speak a fact here was to have one's voice, and likely one's throat, erased. Mara looked at him, a question in her eyes. How? He held up a hand, his mind working. The log provided the key, the frequency. 440 Hz. A pure tone. The enforcement wasn't triggered by meaning, but by specific sonic patterns matching speech. A loophole. Not speech, but sound. He pointed to his throat, then made a humming motion with his hand, shaping an invisible note in the air. Understanding dawned on Mara's face, followed by concern. His vocal cords were already ravaged, strained to muteness. To produce a controlled, sustained tone at the exact frequency, it would be like scraping sandpaper over an open wound. He met her gaze and nodded once, grimly. There was no other path. The quest marker glowed at the end of the corridor, where a massive, circular door of dark metal stood sealed. Leon closed his eyes, pushing past the pain and fatigue. He focused on the debug mask's feed, using it to visualize the sonic subroutine as a shimmering, resonant field ahead. He needed to match its frequency, to introduce a conflicting harmonic that would cause a buffer overflow, a glitch in the listener. He took a deep, silent breath, feeling the damaged tissues in his throat protest. He began to hum. It started as a ragged, airy vibration, more a wheeze than a tone. Pain lanced through his larynx, sharp and immediate. He saw Mara wince in sympathy. He forced more air, shaping it, tuning it. The debug mask helped, giving him real-time feedback on the frequency output. 435 Hz. 438. He adjusted, the agony of minute muscular control. 439.5. 440.1. There. A clean, steady A4 note, humming from his ruined voice. The corridor reacted. The shimmering sonic field in his vision began to flutter. The polished walls emitted a faint, discordant ringing, like wine glasses vibrating. The log scrolled with error messages. Listener protocol conflict. Input stream corrupt. Buffer overflow imminent. The humming note was pure data, meaningless but perfectly matched, flooding the subroutine's processing queue. Leon held the note. Seconds stretched. The pain was a white-hot brand in his throat. Tears welled in his eyes from the strain. He felt something give, a tiny, wet tearing sensation. The note wavered but he locked it back in place, his entire body trembling with the effort. With a sound like shattering crystal, the sonic field collapsed. The oppressive pressure in the corridor vanished. The massive door at the end gave a deep groan and slid sideways into the wall, revealing darkness beyond. Leon's humming cut off into a choked gasp. He doubled over, hands on his knees, sucking in ragged, soundless breaths. His throat felt shredded. When he tried to speak, only a faint, airless whisper emerged, each syllable a knife. He could whisper, but nothing more. The cost was paid. Mara was at his side in an instant, a steadying hand on his shoulder. Her touch was firm, wordless. After a moment, he straightened, nodding. They moved forward, into the chamber. It was vast, a cathedral of dead technology. The ceiling was lost in gloom, but the center of the room was bathed in a soft, pulsating blue light. There, floating 3 feet above a dais of black stone, was the heart of the system. It was not a physical object as he understood them. It was a knot of living, breathing code. A core of brilliant white light, around which swarmed constellations of glowing glyphs, shifting mathematical notations, and cascading streams of conditional logic, if-then-else statements that wrote and rewrote themselves in real time. It pulsed like a heartbeat, and with each pulse, the very fabric of the local reality in the chamber subtly shifted. The air grew heavier, then lighter. Gravity fluctuated minutely. A faint scent of ozone bloomed and died. This was the artifact, a focal point of the cosmic system's source code. Leon approached, drawn by a magnetism that was both intellectual and visceral. His debug log went wild, scrolling with terabytes of raw data. Artifact, heart_OF_system, detected. Administrative access protocols detected. Warning, unfiltered data stream hazardous to consciousness. The mask on his face grew warm, its synchronization flickering, 87%. 88%. 89%, as it struggled to process the influx. He reached the dais. Mara hung back, her eyes wide with awe and fear. Leon's log began parsing the heart's immediate functions. It was a rewrite engine. It could, for a limited time and within a constrained area, overwrite local cosmic rules. The code displayed possible edits, temporary substitutions for deadly edicts. He saw a fragment, could replace all anomalies must be purged with all anomalies are to be ignored, for a duration measured in minutes. The power was staggering, and terrifyingly finite. Using it would likely draw the attention of the entire system. He needed to understand more. To interface. His hand, almost of its own volition, reached out. His fingers, inches from the swirling core of light, trembled. "Don't," Mara whispered, the first word she'd risked in the chamber. But it was too late. His fingertips brushed the outer shell of energy. Reality screamed. Not a sound, but a sensation, a torrent of raw, unfiltered system code exploded into his mind through the debug log. It wasn't data, it was the blueprint of everything. The foundational laws of physics, the nested loops of causality, the death sentences of every cosmic rule, all laid bare in a blinding, incomprehensible flood. His vision whited out. The debug mask screeched in feedback, its synchronization skyrocketing to 95%, then 100%, then overloading. Warning glyphs burned in his retinas. Critical system feedback. Admin access granted. Containment breach. He was drowning in the source code of existence. He saw the glitches not as errors, but as inherent flaws in a decaying construct. He saw the enforcers not as hunters, but as automated cleanup routines. And he saw himself, a single line of anomalous code, highlighted in blazing red, flagged for deletion. He tried to pull back, but his hand was locked, fused to the energy by the torrent of connection. The pain in his throat was forgotten, swallowed by the psychic maelstrom. Then, a new presence shattered the chamber's relative quiet. Not through the door they'd entered, but materializing from the very air itself, as if a patch of reality had reconfigured. 6 enforcers in their silent, featureless masks and gray uniforms solidified into existence, forming a perimeter. The air grew cold and still, rules stabilizing into ironclad certainty around them. And behind them, stepping from a ripple of distorted space, came Code Cleaver. The Enforcer General was a monument of silent authority. His mask was more ornate, etched with faint, glowing lines of administrative script. His presence didn't just enforce rules, it defined them. The chamber's fluctuating reality snapped into a rigid, hostile order. The pulsating light of the heart seemed to dim under his gaze. Leon, still mentally reeling from the system overload, his hand stuck to the artifact, could only stare. Mara had her blade out, but she was frozen, facing an impossibility. Code Cleaver's head tilted slightly, regarding Leon, the anomaly connected to the heart. When he spoke, his voice was a dry, synthetic rasp, devoid of emotion, each word a pronouncement of absolute law. Anomaly, he intoned, the word final and heavy. Your debugging ends now. The chamber's air thickened with the weight of impending violence. Leon's fingers still tingled from the heart's pulsating code, his mind reeling from the psychic feedback that felt like shards of glass scraping against his consciousness. Before him, Enforcer General Code Cleaver stood motionless, the silver mask reflecting the heart's eerie glow in fractured patterns that seemed to writhe like trapped insects. Leon tried to whisper a warning to Mara, but his vocal cords produced only a rasping breath. The damage from humming the 440 Hz frequency had reduced his voice to broken fragments. He saw her shift into a defensive stance beside him, her eyes scanning the 6 enforcers who materialized in perfect formation around the cleaver. Their masks were identical, featureless silver ovals that absorbed light rather than reflected it. Code Cleaver didn't move. He didn't need to. A notification window exploded across Leon's vision, his rule reader's debug log screaming with crimson text. Rule enforcement detected. Local gravity parameters modified. Magnitude, 10x standard. Source, Enforcer General Code Cleaver. Execution time, immediate. The world compressed. Leon's knees buckled first, the sudden weight driving him toward the stone floor with terrifying force. He gasped, the air itself feeling thick as syrup in his lungs. Beside him, Mara cried out as she dropped to one knee, her arms trembling with the effort of simply staying upright. The ancient chamber groaned, centuries-old stone that had withstood glitch storms and temporal anomalies now cracked under the invisible pressure. Dust erupted from newly formed fissures in the walls, hanging in the air like frozen constellations. Through the agony, Leon's log continued parsing data. He saw the rules code structure, elegant, brutal lines of system script that rewrote local physics with administrative authority. Unlike the glitched rules he'd encountered before, this one was clean, efficient, and utterly merciless. No syntax errors. No memory leaks. Just pure enforcement. All anomalies must be purged, Code Cleaver's voice echoed, though his mask didn't move. The words weren't spoken aloud but manifested directly in the chamber's reality, vibrating through the stone and air alike. Your existence violates system integrity. Leon's mind raced even as his body screamed. The heart of the system still pulsed where he'd touched it, a living core of code just 3 meters away. His log showed its interface protocols, the same admin access that had nearly shattered his psyche moments before. He could see the pathways, the command structures, the raw power waiting to be directed. With a groan that tore at his damaged throat, Leon forced his hand toward the heart. Every centimeter felt like lifting a mountain. His fingers trembled, muscles burning with the strain of fighting 10 times their normal weight. Mara watched him, her own struggle evident in the sweat beading on her forehead and the way her breath came in ragged gasps. The enforcers began advancing, their movements unnaturally smooth despite the crushing gravity. They didn't stagger or struggle, the rule didn't affect them. Of course it didn't. They were extensions of the system itself, tools of its will. Leon's fingers brushed the heart's surface. Immediately, his vision flooded with system interfaces. Admin panels. Rule editors. Reality parameters. It was too much, a firehose of data that threatened to drown what remained of his sanity. His debug mask, already unstable from exceeding 100% synchronization, flared with warning indicators. The mask's filters were failing, letting through raw, unfiltered system code that burned through his neural pathways. He focused through the pain, through the psychic feedback that made his teeth ache and his vision blur. The log helped, parsing the torrent into manageable streams. He found the gravity rule's signature, traced it back to its enforcement node, identified the command structure. With a whispered command that cost him what little voice he had left, Leon input a counter-rule through the heart's interface. Rule proposal, gravity nullification. Local scope, chamber radius 15 m. Priority, override. The heart pulsed brighter, its light washing over the chamber in waves of cerulean blue. For a heartbeat, the crushing weight lifted. Leon gasped as air flooded his lungs properly for the first time since the attack began. Mara staggered to her feet, relief flashing across her face. Then Code Cleaver raised a hand. The nullification rule shattered like glass. Leon's log screamed with error messages as the gravity returned, this time with even greater force. He dropped to the floor completely, cheek pressed against cold stone that felt like it was trying to swallow him. Cracks spiderwebbed across the chamber ceiling, raining dust and small fragments of rock. One of the ancient pillars groaned ominously, its structural integrity failing under the strain. Primitive, Code Cleaver's voice echoed again. You treat symptoms. I am the disease. Through the pain, Leon's log continued working. It wasn't just analyzing the gravity rule now, it was tracing Code Cleaver's connection to the central system. The Enforcer General wasn't just enforcing rules, he was a conduit for them, a living tether to the Cosmic Order's core architecture. Leon could see the connection lines in his vision, golden threads of data that stretched from Code Cleaver's form back through reality itself, anchored somewhere beyond normal space. That was the weakness. Not the rules. The Enforcer himself. Leon dragged himself closer to the heart, ignoring the way his bones protested, ignoring the blood he could taste in his mouth from the strain. His nose began to bleed, warm droplets splattering against the stone floor. The psychic feedback from the overloaded debug mask was becoming physical now, a pounding headache that felt like his skull might split, dizziness that made the chamber spin even as he lay pressed against it. He accessed the heart's deeper functions, bypassing the rule editors entirely. Instead, he targeted the communication protocols, the error reporting systems, the recursive loops that handled system anomalies. His log provided the syntax, the precise command structures needed. With a mental command that felt like tearing part of his own mind away, Leon initiated the hack. The heart flared with blinding white light. Recursive error messages, thousands of them, millions, flooded through Code Cleaver's tether connection. Not attacks, not counter-rules, but pure, chaotic data. System reports of non-existent breaches. notification loops that referenced themselves infinitely. Memory allocation errors that tried to process their own error codes. It was digital noise given form, a tsunami of meaningless information designed to overload a single channel. Code Cleaver staggered. For the first time, the Enforcer General showed physical reaction. His head tilted slightly, the silver mask reflecting the heart's erratic light in jagged patterns. The golden connection lines in Leon's vision flickered, pulsed, then began to fray at the edges. The gravity rule wavered, its intensity dropping to 8-fold, then 6-fold, then 4-fold. Leon paid the price immediately. The mental focus required for the hack burned through his reserves like fire through dry paper. His nosebleed became a steady stream, crimson droplets pattering against the stone in rhythm with his pounding heartbeat. The dizziness intensified until the chamber seemed to tilt on its axis, walls swimming in and out of focus. He could feel something tearing in his mind, not physically, but in the places where his consciousness interfaced with the debug log, with the overloaded mask, with the heart's overwhelming presence. But it worked. Code Cleaver took a step back, then another. The enforcers around him froze, their perfect formation breaking as they seemed to lose coordination. The golden tether lines flickered wildly, some snapping entirely and dissolving into static. The gravity rule collapsed completely. Leon pushed himself up on trembling arms, gasping as normal weight returned. The relief was immediate but short-lived, his body screamed from the aftermath of strain, and his mind felt hollowed out, scraped clean of thought. He could see Code Cleaver recovering already, the connection lines beginning to re-stabilize, the enforcers regrouping. Then Mara shouted, her voice cutting through the chamber's groaning stone. The zone is collapsing. We have to go. Leon looked past Code Cleaver, past the enforcers, to the chamber entrance. The ruins beyond were glitching, not in the controlled, predictable ways of manipulated rules, but in violent, chaotic spasms. Walls flickered between solid stone and transparent code. Floors dissolved into pixelated static before reforming slightly differently. The air itself seemed to tear in places, revealing glimpses of void-black nothingness behind reality. The heart's overload, the recursive error attack, the severing of Code Cleaver's tether, it had all destabilized the glitch zone's already precarious integrity. The ancient ruins, built on layers of system code and cosmic rules, were coming apart at the seams. Code Cleaver straightened, the golden lines in Leon's vision solidifying once more. But the Enforcer General didn't advance. Instead, he raised a hand, and new figures materialized at the chamber entrance, not just the original 6 enforcers, but reinforcements. Dozens of them. Silver masks filled the doorway, spilling into the corridor beyond. The ruins groaned louder, a deep, seismic sound that vibrated through stone and bone alike. A section of ceiling collapsed entirely, crashing down in a cloud of dust and debris. The heart pulsed erratically, its light strobing between blue and sickly green. Leon met Mara's eyes across the crumbling chamber. She nodded toward a side passage, one that hadn't existed moments before, a glitch-formed opening in the wall that showed only darkness beyond. Code Cleaver took a step forward. The enforcers advanced in unison. The ruins continued to glitch uncontrollably around them, reality itself unraveling. The world screamed in static. Leon stumbled, his vision a kaleidoscope of breaking realities. The ancient ruins around them didn't just collapse, they unraveled, stone walls dissolving into cascading error messages that scrolled like waterfalls of corrupted data. The heart of the system chamber behind them pulsed with erratic light, each pulse sending shockwaves through the fabric of the glitch zone. Mara grabbed his arm, her fingers digging through the fabric of his sleeve. "Run," she shouted, but her voice came distorted, layered with digital artifacts. "The zone's integrity is below critical." Leon's rule reader's debug log flooded his perception with warnings. System integrity, 23% and falling, role set collapse detected, reality fragmentation imminent. The text scrolled too fast to read fully, but he caught fragments, corrupted pathfinding data, unstable spatial coordinates, rules that contradicted themselves in real time. Around them, the other survivors from Mara's faction scrambled. Torin, the grizzled glitch zone veteran, moved with surprising agility despite his age, helping Lissa over a section of floor that kept phasing in and out of existence. Lissa's eyes were wide with terror, but her hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking gear and counting heads. North-northwest. Torin yelled over the growing roar of collapsing reality. The border's strongest there. Leon tried to speak, but only a rasping whisper emerged. His throat burned with every attempted breath, the damage from overloading the heart's interface still fresh. He pointed instead, his debug log highlighting a path through the chaos, a thread of stable code fragments weaving through the disintegrating landscape. They ran through corridors that shouldn't exist. One moment they were in ancient stone halls, the next in a forest of crystalline data structures that hummed with dying energy. The air tasted of ozone and something else, the metallic tang of corrupted system files. Leon's nosebleed had slowed to a trickle, but the dizziness remained, making the world tilt dangerously with every step. His debug mask felt like a branding iron against his temples. The synchronization had exceeded 100% back in the heart chamber, and now it thrummed with unstable energy, feeding him raw data streams he could barely process. Every rule in the zone was breaking down, but breaking unevenly, some collapsing into harmless static, others twisting into new, unpredictable forms. A section of wall ahead shimmered, then resolved into a perfect mirror image of their group running toward them. Mara skidded to a halt. "Don't look," she warned, but it was too late. Lissa met her own reflection's eyes. The mirrored Lissa smiled, then stepped out of the wall. "Rule manifestation." Torin shouted, drawing a weapon that glowed with stolen system energy. "Don't engage. Run around." But Leon's log was already analyzing. Rule detected, reflections gain autonomy, subroutine corrupted, memory leak at address 0x7FF. He saw it, a flaw in the rule's implementation. The mirrored entities drew their existence from the observer's memories, but the subroutine allocating that memory had a buffer overflow vulnerability. He tried to whisper the exploit, but his voice failed completely. Instead, he grabbed Mara's hand and traced letters on her palm with his finger, loop command. Mara understood instantly. "Everyone," she shouted. "Describe what you're seeing. In detail. Keep talking." Torin began narrating their surroundings with military precision. Lissa joined in, her voice trembling but clear. The mirrored entities flickered, their forms becoming less distinct as the memory allocation subroutine struggled to process the flood of contradictory sensory data. They dissolved back into the wall, leaving only static patterns behind. They ran again, Leon's log constantly updating their path. The stable code fragments he followed weren't physical paths but conceptual ones, sequences of reality that hadn't yet corrupted. He led them through a library where books floated in zero gravity, their pages displaying error codes instead of text. He guided them across a bridge that existed only when no one was looking directly at it, forcing them to navigate by peripheral vision alone. Then the silence fell. It wasn't an absence of sound, it was an active suppression. The roaring collapse of the glitch zone, the panicked breathing of the survivors, even the hum of Leon's own debug mask, all cut off simultaneously. Mara's mouth moved in a shout, but no sound emerged. Torin gestured frantically, but his instructions were lost to the void. Leon's log flashed red. Rule activated, silence becomes lethal, countdown initiated, 47 seconds, mechanism, vocal cord paralysis through sound wave cancellation. 47 seconds. He could feel it already, a tightening in his throat, a numbness spreading through his vocal cords. The rule wasn't just enforcing silence, it was weaponizing it, using the absence of sound to trigger biological shutdown. His eyes scanned the log's analysis. The rule operated through a sophisticated interference pattern that cancelled all sound waves, but its implementation had a flaw, it used a recursive function to maintain the cancellation field. Recursive functions needed termination conditions, and this one's was poorly defined. A memory leak in the self-referential command structure. He had to speak. Had to input a command that would reference itself, creating an infinite loop that would overflow the memory buffer and crash the subroutine. But his voice was already damaged beyond normal function. The strain from hacking the heart's chamber, the vocal cord damage from earlier exploits, all of it screamed at him that this would be the final push. Permanent damage. Possibly complete loss of voice. Mara was looking at him, her eyes wide with understanding. She shook her head slowly, mouthing the word, no. 30 seconds. Leon closed his eyes. The debug mask burned hotter, feeding him the exact syntax he needed. A whisper command that would reference its own execution in a loop. Simple in concept, deadly in execution when your vocal cords were already shredded tissue. He opened his mouth. The first attempt produced only air. A faint hiss that the silence rule immediately cancelled. 20 seconds. Torin was on his knees now, hands at his throat. Lissa had collapsed entirely, her body convulsing silently. Leon focused everything, the remaining mental energy from overloading Code Cleaver's tether, the unstable synchronization of the debug mask, the desperate need to survive. He thought of the academy, of being the laughingstock, of watching S-class heroes die to rules they couldn't understand while he saw the code behind it all. He whispered. The sound was barely audible even to himself, a rasping, broken thing that tore at his throat like broken glass. But it contained the command, execute command, execute command, execute command. The recursion was imperfect, his damaged voice couldn't maintain perfect repetition, but it was enough. The silence rule subroutine tried to process the self-referential loop, allocating memory for each iteration, but with no termination condition defined. Leon felt something tear in his throat. A hot, wet sensation followed by a coppery taste in his mouth. Blood. He kept whispering, each repetition more painful than the last, his voice dropping to a hoarse, barely there croak. The world flickered. The silence shattered in a burst of static noise, all the sounds that had been suppressed returning at once in a deafening cacophony. The rule subroutine had overflowed, crashing in a glorious cascade of error messages that scrolled across Leon's vision. Buffer overflow, memory leak exploited, rule nullified. He collapsed, coughing blood onto the shifting ground. Mara was at his side instantly, her hands checking his throat. Don't try to speak, she said, her own voice raw with relief. Just don't. His voice was gone now, not just damaged, but destroyed. When he tried to make sound, only a painful, airy rasp emerged. Permanent hoarseness at best, complete vocal loss at worst. The cost of their survival. But they could move again. The path to the zone's edge cleared before them, the chaotic glitching stabilizing into a recognizable landscape, the twisted, half-real terrain that marked the border between the glitch zone and the normal world. They stumbled forward, Leon leaning heavily on Mara, Torin supporting Lissa. The world continued to unravel behind them, reality folding in on itself in impossible geometries. But ahead was the border. A shimmering wall of code that separated chaos from order. They reached it just as the final collapse began. The ground fell away behind them, dissolving into a sea of scrolling error messages. The sky tore like paper, revealing the raw system architecture beneath, endless lines of cosmic code governing reality itself. Mara reached for the border code, her hands moving in the intricate gestures she'd learned from a lifetime in the glitch zone. Almost there, she whispered. Just a little further. Then the code solidified. The shimmering wall hardened into an impenetrable barrier, glowing with enforced system integrity. From the dissolving ruins behind them, a figure emerged. Code Cleaver looked different now, wounded, yes. His enforcer armor was cracked in places, leaking streams of corrupted data. One of his mask's eye lenses was shattered, revealing a glimpse of something inhuman beneath. But he stood straight, his remaining eye fixed on Leon with single-minded determination. No one leaves, Code Cleaver said, his voice echoing with finality. He raised a hand, and the border code responded, weaving itself into an intricate lattice of prohibition commands. Rule enforced, no exit, perimeter sealed, anomaly containment protocol active. Leon's debug log flashed with urgent, pulsing red text. Critical, system integrity at 5% in this sector, exploit possible, analyzing. The Enforcer General took a step forward, the ground stabilizing beneath his feet as the system prioritized his presence over its own collapse. Around him, the remaining enforcers materialized, 6 silent, masked figures, their weapons glowing with termination protocols. Mara looked at Leon, then at the solid barrier, then back at the approaching enforcers. Her expression wasn't despair, but calculation. Options, she whispered. Leon's eyes remained fixed on his log, watching as it analyzed the crumbling system around them. The glitch zone was dying, but in its death throes, everything was vulnerable. Everything could be hacked. His ruined throat couldn't answer her. But his mind was already working, the debug mask feeding him possibilities, exploits, loopholes in a system that was tearing itself apart. The final stand would be here, at the edge of everything. The air in the glitch zone tasted of ozone and static, a metallic tang that clung to Leon's tongue as he faced the impenetrable barrier. Before him, Enforcer General Code Cleaver stood with 6 masked enforcers, their forms flickering like corrupted holograms against the unraveling landscape. The zone itself was dying, patches of reality dissolved into pixelated snow, while others warped into impossible geometries that hurt the eyes to follow. Behind Leon, Mara, Torin, and Lissa pressed close, their breaths shallow. Torin's knuckles were white around a glitched artifact that hummed with unstable energy, while Lissa kept scanning the collapsing ruins for any sign of escape that wasn't there. Code Cleaver's voice cut through the chaos, a monotone devoid of emotion yet heavy with finality. Anomaly designation, Leon. Corruption level, critical. Termination protocol, immediate. The enforcers shifted in unison, their masks reflecting the glitching light of the zone. Leon's throat burned with every breath, the vocal damage from earlier exploits reducing his voice to a painful rasp that felt like sandpaper against his cords. He tried to speak, but only a whisper of air escaped, enough to remind him of the cost he'd paid to survive this far. His rule reader's debug log flickered in his vision, lines of system code scrolling too fast to read normally. But Leon had learned to parse them instinctively. The barrier rule, exit denied, glowed in crimson text, its structure woven into the zone's core system like a knot of thorns. He focused, pushing past the dizziness that still lingered from overloading Code Cleaver's tether. The log responded, breaking down the rule's components, a recursive loop tied to spatial coordinates, a vocal recognition subroutine, and a failsafe linked to the enforcer's presence. Each line of code pulsed with the strain of the collapsing zone, system integrity at 5%, as the log had warned. Fragments of error messages peppered his view, memory_leak_ detected, recursive_overflow_ imminent, system_core_ frame. Mara leaned in, her voice low. The zone won't hold much longer. If we don't break through now, we'll be erased with it. Her eyes darted to Code Cleaver, who raised a hand. The enforcers began to advance, their movements synchronized like clockwork. Leon's mind raced. The heart of the system artifact still hummed in his memory, its residual power a faint echo in his debug log. He hadn't fully interfaced with it, the psychic feedback had been too severe, but its code lingered, a template of admin access he could barely grasp. He visualized it now, the pulsating core of living system code from the ruins chamber. Its structure was chaotic, but it held the key to rewriting rules, if only temporarily. As the enforcers closed in, Leon's log highlighted a vulnerability in the barrier rule, its recursive function was already stressed by the zone's collapse. A memory leak had formed, a gap in the code where data bled out into nothingness. He could exploit it, but the cost flashed in his vision, lifespan_cost, significant. The log didn't specify days or years, only the weight of strain that would age him prematurely. Leon's hands trembled. He thought of the academy, of being the F-rank laughingstock, of the S-class heroes who died obeying rules he could now hack. Survival had always come at a price, his voice, his mind, now his lifespan. He met Mara's gaze, saw the unspoken trust there, and nodded. He focused on the barrier, ignoring the enforcer's approach. Torin and Lissa moved to intercept, their glitched artifacts flaring with unstable light. A skirmish erupted, crackles of energy, the silent strikes of enforcers. Leon tuned it out, his world narrowing to the code. Using the heart's residual power, he fed a paradoxical command into the log, this exit is open. But it wasn't just words, he visualized the system's memory addresses, mapping them in his mind like a constellation. The command looped back on itself, a self-referential statement that contradicted the barrier's core logic. He pushed it into the memory leak, forcing a cascade of errors. Pain lanced through his skull, sharp and deep. His vision blurred, and he felt a hollowing in his chest, as if something vital were being drained. The log flashed warnings, lifespan_drain_active, psychic_feedback_critical. But he held on, whispering the command in his rasping voice, each syllable agony. The barrier shimmered, its solid surface cracking into a web of light. Pixels broke away, dissolving into static. The zone around them convulsed, rules went haywire. Gravity flickered, causing enforcers to stumble. Light cast shadows that moved independently. Silence became a cacophony of glitched noise. Code Cleaver roared, a sound of pure system fury. Corruption escalating. Contain, but the cascading glitch reached him. Static engulfed his form, wrapping him in a cocoon of digital snow. He struggled, his connection to the central system severed once more, but this time, the zone's collapse amplified the effect. He was neutralized, trapped in a stasis of his own making. The enforcers froze, their programming disrupted by the rule chaos. Now! Mara shouted, grabbing Leon's arm. He stumbled, his legs weak from the strain. Torin and Lissa led the way, sprinting through the shattered barrier. As they crossed, the zone behind them collapsed entirely, a wave of static erasing the ruins, the enforcers, everything. The world snapped back into focus, they stood in a wilderness of rolling hills and ancient trees, the air clean and still. Leon collapsed to his knees, gasping. His throat felt raw, his mind fogged with exhaustion. He looked back, but the glitch zone was gone, replaced by ordinary landscape. Only a faint shimmer in the air hinted at what had been. Mara knelt beside him, her hand on his shoulder. You did it. Her voice was soft, filled with a relief that echoed in the quiet. Torin and Lissa kept watch, their postures tense but easing as no threat emerged. Leon's debug log flickered again, updating with a new message, system_notice, anomaly status elevated. New quests available. The cosmic order is adapting. He read it silently, the words settling in his mind like a weight. He hadn't solved anything, the ultimate mystery of the system remained, its origins and purpose still shrouded. But for now, they'd survived. He looked at the horizon, where the sun dipped low, casting long shadows. The wilderness stretched out, vast and unknown, holding secrets of its own. Mara followed his gaze, then nodded, a faint smile touching her lips. We live to hack another day. Her words hung in the air, a promise and a warning. Leon rose slowly, his body aching, his voice a whisper lost to the wind. He knew the enforcers would return, the system would adapt, and the hunt would continue. But in this moment, with his allies beside him and the open sky above, he allowed himself to breathe. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with more deadly rules and cosmic horrors, but he had his debug log, his hard-won skills, and the glimmer of a truth yet to be uncovered. The journey was far from over.